Chapter 140. Grand Concubine Yi examined Han Yunxi carefully. This girl's mother was the Empress Dowager's savior, but now she was her savior instead. Was this fate making fools of people? Grand Concubine Yi had spent her entire life in the imperial harem. No matter what, she wasn't someone easy to deal with. Murong Wanru had sent someone to invite Han Yunxi over. Although she didn't say anything, Han Yunxi was smart enough to guess. Even if Murong Wanru went in person, she was still worried that this girl would hold a grudge and give her an inch for a yard. Who knew that she'd come of her own accord as soon as Murong Wanru left? In fact, this girl could have come a little later. She could have even been a little negligent when she was detoxifying the poison. So many poison doctors couldn't detect the poison. If she really died from the poison, this girl wouldn't be at fault. After all, once she died, this girl would become the mistress of the Duke of Qin's estate. But she not only ignored past enmity and came of her own accord, but did her best to treat her. At the very least, she had no ill intentions. Grand Concubine Yi sighed with emotion in her heart. Han Yunxi, Han Yunxi. If you hadn't mixed with the Empress Dowager, I wouldn't have been unable to tolerate you. With your brilliant poison skills, you might even be able to give Feiye a helping hand. After taking her pulse, Han Yunxi examined her carefully to make sure the poison was fading away. Then she removed the needles from her acupuncture points. Mu Fei truly is blessed by the heavens. The poison's pretty much gone, but there's still some residue that needs acupuncture. Starting tomorrow, Chunxie will come every day to treat Mu Fei with acupuncture. You'll recover after 3 days. During this time, I ask Mu Fei to eat as light a diet as possible and eat more things to moisten your throat, Han Yunxi instructed. Grand Concubine Yi was naturally happy, but now that her life was no longer in danger, she calmed down and wasn't as agitated as before. She nodded. Very good, Han Yunxi laughed in her heart. Then Mu Fei should rest first. If there's anything, call Chunxie over at any time. Grand Concubine Yi waved her hand lazily, but after a pause, she still spoke. This time, it's all thanks to you. Han Yunxi was very surprised. She finally felt a sense of accomplishment from saving someone. She smiled and said, "This is what this concubine should do. This concubine will take her leave." Unexpectedly, she hadn't even stepped out of the door when Murong Wanru suddenly pushed the door open and came in. "Mu Fei. Mother, I can't find her." Murong Wanru was dumbfounded at the sight of Han Yunxi. Why was this woman here? She searched everywhere in the Han family, but no one knew where Han Yunxi had gone. She regretted it and was afraid that she wouldn't be able to save her mother's life if she was too late. Who knew that Han Yunxi would actually be here? "Wanru, no matter what happens in the future, just say it. Otherwise, you and I won't be able to bear the consequences," Han Yunxi said indifferently as she walked past Murong Wanru and left. Murong Wanru woke up with a start after the door slammed shut, only to see Grand Concubine Yi staring at her with narrowed eyes. "Imperial Mother, you? This concubine's life was almost ruined by your hand. You still dare to squabble with your sister-in-law over such a serious matter? Who gave you the guts?" Grand Concubine Yi demanded angrily. Murong Wanru had calculated everything perfectly. If she went to invite her personally, then even if Han Yunxi didn't come, she could have Mu Fei forcefully summon her back. There was still time. How would she know that Han Yunxi would come of her own accord? "Mu Fei, I didn't. I thought she knew. How could she not know what was going on if I went to invite her at that time?" Murong Wanru could only defend herself like this. Grand Concubine Yi understood the gravity of the situation here. She grew even angrier. "Enough, stop trying to explain yourself. You're clearly risking my life. Don't think I can't tell." How could Grand Concubine Yi not know Murong Wanru's true feelings towards Han Yunxi? Grand Concubine Yi could allow her to play tricks on Han Yunxi, but she'd never allow her to play tricks on her. Murong Wanru understood Grand Concubine Yi's temper very well. She knew she had no room to defend herself, but she was too surprised. She never thought that Han Yunxi could catch her off guard in front of her most doting Mu Fei. "Han Yunxi, Murong Wanru, won't rest until I get rid of you." She knelt down, delicate and pitiful, and choked with sobs. Daughter was wrong. Daughter was gravely wrong. Mufei, please punish me severely. Grand concubine Yi's anger wouldn't dissipate so easily. She pointed at the door. Get out immediately. Shut yourself up and reflect on your mistakes. Without my orders, you're not allowed to leave. Han Yunxi heard this from the door and almost burst into laughter. Fortunately, she held back in time. Satisfied and in a good mood, she left for real. As soon as she reached the hibiscus courtyard, Han Yunxi knew that Long Fei Yi hadn't returned at all. That guy really was heartless. Mu Fei's life was on the line from being poisoned, but he didn't even show his face. She ate breakfast as she asked, "Is Chu Shifeng not here, either? He went out yesterday afternoon and hasn't come back." Esteemed Wang Fei, the entire estate knows about what happened yesterday. You're so formidable. Zhao Mema smiled as she gave her a thumbs up. Last night's events would cause a sensation for days. It wasn't the first time Han Yunxi had made headlines in the capital, so she didn't care much. But Zhao Mema's words reminded her of Madame Li's words before she died. Everyone knew that Tianning had a Duke of Qin, but not Emperor Tianhui. Everyone knew that Qin Wangfei's poison skills were brilliant, but not that she was an expert in detoxification and poisoning. How much trouble would these words bring to Long Fei Yi? How much trouble would that bring to her? Would Long Fei Yi be able to settle the matter of a traitor in the Han family that implicated the entire family? She didn't know if that fellow was in the palace or at the solitary enclosure right now. She could only wait until he came back to find out the situation. Thinking up to here, Han Yunxi lost her appetite. She was exhausted from a sleepless night, so she told Zhao Mema not to disturb her before going upstairs to rest. After being kidnapped, faced with Madame Shu's false accusations, and then the matter of the bet, Han Yunxi hadn't had a good night's sleep yet. Although her mind was full of worries, she was still exhausted. She didn't even reach the bed before she fell on it and pretended to be dead. After lying there for a long time, she lazily turned over. Who knew that when she looked up, she would see a pair of enchanting eyes staring at her with a smile on the roof beam. Ah! Han Yunxi shrieked as she bolted upright, scared out of her drowsiness. Wasn't this fellow the devilish owner of the Celestial Fragrance Tea Shop, Jiyu? How did you get in here? She cried out in alarm. The Duke of Qin's estate was heavily guarded, and this hibiscus courtyard was even more airtight. This fellow had actually snuck in without a sound. Seeing Han Yunxi's reaction, Gu's smile became even more brilliant. He hooked his legs onto the rafters and hung down like a bat. He chuckled at Han Yunxi. "I thought you weren't afraid of anything, but it turns out you're such a coward." Han Yunxi rolled her eyes and asked warily, "What are you doing here?" "Poison lass, is this how you treat your savior?" Jiyu asked seriously. Han Yunxi imitated his serious appearance and asked back, "Where is my savior?" Jiyu Chishao arrogantly pointed at his chest with his thumb. "Here." Han Yunxi put on a fake smile. "I don't know you." "You." Jiyu immediately flipped over and sat beside Han Yunxi. "Hey, no matter what, I risked my life to save you. Are you really going to turn your back on me?" Han Yunxi immediately stood up and put a safe distance between them. She looked at him with disdain. "If you have something to say it quickly. No matter where this Evildor came from, with his dissolute nature and unruly appearance, he must be a bad guy with no bottom line and no integrity. It was best to stay away from him. TSK, heartless lass." Jiyu looked dejected. "Enough of that. If you had acted earlier, would you have risked your life to save me?" Although Han Yunxi had pleaded for leniency on behalf of the Celestial Fragrance Tea Shop, that was just to spite Long Fei Ye. Jiyu Chishao had saved her for the same reason as Long Fei Ye. They'd both delayed until the very end and ignored her danger to lure out the true culprit behind the scenes. Jiyu Chishao's martial arts skills were definitely on par with Qingyi's. He could very well have saved her back in the caves. After being exposed by Han Yunxi, Jiyu stroked a strand of hair behind his ear and slowly smoothed it down. He did not quibble. Han Yunxi raised her eyebrows and looked at him. Her heart was filled with emotions. Why did this guy's smooth movements look even prettier than a woman's? And it did not look awkward at all. Could it be that everything would be beautiful if one was beautiful? Of course, Han Yunxi would not be bewitched by his beauty. She did not hold back. Why are you looking for me? Long Fei Yi was already unhappy when she took off her shoes and socks. If he knew that a man had barged into her room, who knew how that conservative iceberg would react? I have something to do. Ji Yu immediately replied. Then tell me. Actually, Han Yunxi was still very curious. If he took the risk to barge in here to find her, there must be something. Ji Yu chuckled and got up to approach. Han Yunxi immediately retreated. Stay away from me, or else I'll call for help. This guy was really brilliant when given a little sunshine. Give him an inch and he would want a mile. Only then did Ji Yu Chishao stop and ask in a low voice, Lass, who taught you your poison skills? Who told you to use goldfish to test for 10,000 snake poison? Last night, Ji Yu was also at the Supreme Court's entrance and saw the entire process of Han Yunxi testing the poison. Not to mention the Li family, even he did not know that goldfish could test for 10,000 snake poison. Presumably, the masked man behind the Li family did not know either. This lass was really amazing. Who was her master? Where did she learn her poison skills? If Han Yunxi remembered correctly, this guy had asked her the same question back in the cave. He couldn't have chased her all the way here just to ask this question, right? I thought you were here to plead for leniency for the Celestial Fragrance tea shop. Han Yunxi was surprised. This gentleman can afford to lose a trifling tea shop. Ji Yu smiled confidently. This gentleman is more interested in you and your poison skills. What an Evildor. Han Yunxi actually felt rather sorry for the tea shop. She wanted to find a chance to ask Chu Shifeng how he'd dealt with Long Fei Yi, but it looked like there was no need for that now. As for her poison skills, a third came from innate talent, a third came from hard work, and the last third came from the help of the detox system. If someone had to ask her who her master was, she could only say that it was the detox system. This formless system contained all sorts of knowledge about poisons from ancient times to modern times. Even now, she was learning as she used it. Of course, this was a secret, her biggest secret. She would never tell anyone. And who taught you your poison skills? You're the owner of a tea shop, but your poison skills aren't bad either. No wonder Long Fei Yi investigated you. Han Yunxi cleverly changed the topic to Ji Yu. Chapter 141. Upon hearing Han Yunxi's question, Ji Yu licked his lips wickedly but did not answer immediately. Instead, he patiently sat back on the warm couch and even leaned lazily on it. With one hand supporting his head, he looked at Han Yunxi with interest. What did this fellow mean? Han Yunxi leaned against the cupboard at the side with her arms crossed and frowned as she looked at him. Who knew that Ji Yu would suddenly blink his bewitching eyes at her? His long eyelashes fluttered, and although he looked innocent and harmless, he was actually charming to the bone. This was really a tempting Evildor. Han Yunxi was stunned for a moment and couldn't take her eyes off him. She was almost bewitched by him. Luckily, her willpower was not bad and she resolutely looked away. She casually picked up a teacup and threw it at Ji Yu. Unfortunately, it was caught by him. What exactly do you want? This rascal. Han Yunxi was about to lose to him. She was so sleepy and really wanted to sleep. Answer my question. You've been a good-for-nothing since young and the Han family didn't have any poison skills to learn. Your mother Madame Tianxin was highly skilled in medicine but not in poison. When you got on the sedan chair, there were poison scars on your face. When you got off the sedan chair, the scars were already cured. When did you start learning poison skills secretly? You've never left the capital and rarely left the Han family. Who taught you? Upon hearing Gu's words, Han Yunxi narrowed her eyes and gave a cold smile. You've done a thorough investigation. Ji Yu wasn't the least bit modest. Of course, I also know that you, who knew that before he could finish his sentence, Han Yunxi suddenly shouted loudly, someone come, there's an assassin. Since she couldn't get an answer from him, she didn't want to waste her precious sleep time with this fellow. Ji Yu didn't expect this and suddenly jumped up. You. Han Yunxi worked even harder. Someone come, quickly, the assassin is here. Soon, The sound of footsteps could be heard from all directions. Ji-yu had put in a lot of effort to get here. He narrowed his eyes and licked his lips. He gave Han Yunshi a thumbs up and exuded a dangerous aura. "Aren't you afraid that I'll take you as a hostage?" But who knew that Han Yunshi was not afraid at all? She lazily lay down on the warm bed, looking like she was telling him to do as he pleased. She even closed her eyes. She was not afraid of him. If this guy was really dangerous, she would have been in danger long ago. Ji-yu was stunned for a moment and then burst out laughing. This woman was really interesting. He liked it. Even though the footsteps outside were approaching, Ji-yu had no intention of escaping. His figure flashed and silently approached Han Yunshi. Han Yunshi only felt a gust of wind blowing against her face and instinctively opened her eyes. Who knew, just as Han Yunshi opened her eyes, Ji-yu leaned down and gently kissed her forehead. It was just a touch. It was ticklish and soft. It was lighter than the breath that fell on her face. At this moment, she saw his perfect chin and his Adam's apple. Everything was so close to her. It turned out that this man who was more beautiful than a woman also had such a masculine side. Han Yunshi's eyes widened and every part of her body froze. All that was left was a panicked and frightened heart that couldn't stop thumping wildly. Heavens, this Ivildor kissed her. No, he was molesting her. It was just a light peck. Ji-yu retreated and smiled enchantingly. "What are you looking at? It's just a mark. This young master has taken a fancy to you." As soon as his voice fell, he didn't wait for Han Yunshi's reply. His figure blurred and he disappeared into thin air. Almost at the same time, 3 guards rushed in and Zhao Mema also rushed over. Seeing esteemed Wang Fei lying on the bed and the room empty, Zhao Mema anxiously said, "Esteemed Wang Fei, where's the assassin? Where's the assassin?" Han Yunshi finally recovered her senses and quickly sat up. "Assassin? Assassin? Where's the assassin?" Zhao Mema was anxious. She was afraid that esteemed Wang Fei would be frightened. "I just dreamed of assassins. There were so many assassins. It was so scary." Han Yunshi lied. With Gu's ability, he probably wouldn't be able to catch up to them. For a moment, the incomparably nervous Zhao Mema and the guards all let down their guard. They didn't know what to say to their master. How could she shout so loudly in her dreams? However, they didn't have any suspicions. After all, the hibiscus courtyard was heavily guarded. Normally, assassins wouldn't be able to enter. Zhao Mema had the guards withdraw and quickly poured a cup of hot tea. "Esteemed Wang Fei, quickly drink some tea to calm your nerves." Han Yunshi indeed needed to calm her nerves. She had really been frightened. Ji-yu, that bastard. Rogue. He actually dared to take liberties with her when she wasn't paying attention. She drank the water while vigorously wiping her forehead. She was at a loss as she pecked her forehead. Was this considered a kiss? Was this considered her first kiss gone? "Esteemed Wang Fei, your forehead. What happened?" Zhao Mema suspiciously asked. Han Yunshi immediately let go. "No. Nothing. Ji-yu Chishao, that evil bastard. She decided to put him on her blacklist. He better not come here again. Otherwise, every time she saw him, she would shout. No, every time she saw him, she would poison him." Her body was originally weak, but after being frightened by Ji-yu, Han Yunshi was completely awake. She sat for a long time before sneaking into Long Fei Yi's palace to soak in the hot spring. In the end, her physical strength was limited. After soaking in the hot spring, she laid on the bed while pondering over Gu's background. She unknowingly fell asleep. This sleep could be described as dark. She slept through the afternoon and night, only waking up at noon the next day. When Han Yunshi woke up, she heard all kinds of rumors in the capital. Without exception, they were all related to what happened last night. There weren't many rumors about Madame Li and her daughter, but there were many jokes about Mu Liu Yu. Everyone was waiting to see if she would keep her bet. The general's manor sent out news that Mu Liu Yu had fallen ill as soon as she returned. She had a high fever and was unconscious. It was such a coincidence that she fell ill at such a critical juncture. As soon as the news came out, the discussions in the capital grew even more intense. Gambling houses big and small even started betting on whether Mu Liuyu would keep her promise, whether Han Yunxi would let Mu Liuyu go, or whether the Duke of Qin would interfere. In any case, there were all kinds of bets. There weren't many discussions about Madame Li and her daughter, nor about Madame Li's last words. It wasn't clear whether someone was leading the discussion, or the matter of the bet was so popular that it covered up everything. Han Yunxi couldn't set her mind at ease until she got a definite answer from Long Fei Yi about the safety of the Han estate. The next night, Han Yunxi had just left Grand Concubine Yi's quarters when she saw that the lights in Long Fei Yi's quarters were still lit. Excited, she immediately went to knock on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Long Fei Yi was lying in a rocking chair, his handsome brows covered in fatigue. One couldn't help but wonder what he'd been up to these past few days. Long Fei Yi knitted his brows and stood up to walk to the desk before opening his mouth. Come in. Han Yunxi pushed open the door and walked all the way to the study. Long Fei Yi picked up a brush to write a memorial without even looking at her. Han Yunxi stood in front of him and asked from the other side of the desk, Madame Li is Qingyi, right? Millimeter, Long Fei Yi replied mildly. Since Madame Li was Qingyi, she was the leader of these spies. If they caught Madame Li, they'd be able to catch all of them in one fell swoop. Then, what about that green-faced, fanged masked man from that day? Han Yunxi asked again. That masked man was a true master of poisons. If they didn't get rid of him now, there'd be more trouble in the future. Other than Madame Li, no one knows of his existence. Long Fei Yi's tone was still very calm, but Han Yunxi's mind was filled with Madame Li's silent face. She couldn't understand. What kind of ability did that masked man have to make Madame Li so loyal to him? After asking about Madame Li, Han Yunxi hesitated for a moment before asking again, Celestial Fragrance Tea Shop's owner, did you find out his background? At this moment, Long Fei Yi raised his head and asked coldly, do you need something from this prince? Han Yunxi didn't know if it was because they were too close or because his eyes were too cold, but she subconsciously took a step back. Couldn't she look for him for nothing? Wasn't she asking about something? Ji Yu flirted with her. All right, this wasn't what she wanted to ask. She'd better get straight to the point. Is the Han family really going to be implicated in the case of the spy? The public version of this matter was that Madame Li and her daughter poisoned the young general. But in reality, Madame Li was the leader of the spies in northern Li country. Her crimes were extremely heinous and harmful, directly threatening Tianning's safety. Since Madame Li came from the Han family had to be responsible. I can't give you a clear answer right now, Long Fei Yi said mildly. Hearing this, Han Yunxi grew agitated. Then what about Yi? You promised me you'd protect him. This was the first time Long Fei Yi had seen Han Yunxi care so much about someone. Was Han Yuni her weakness? He hated it when this woman had a weakness. The matter of the spy was all within his control. He had great power and was confident that he could protect Han Yuni, but Madame Li's words that night had angered Emperor Tianhui. Han Yunxi had no idea that not only was the Han family full of suspicions, but she herself had gotten herself into trouble. Those who knew how to treat poisons were the best at poisoning people. How could Emperor Tianhui not have any thoughts about Madame Li's words? Should he promote her in an important position or guard against her elimination? For someone as suspicious as Emperor Tianhui, it was a matter of a single thought. Moreover, Han Yunxi was Long Fei's wife. How could he not have a headache? He'd have to deal with Emperor Tianhui on this matter. Your lordship can't give you a clear answer right now, Long Fei said mildly. What? Han Yunxi was shocked. She leaned forward and shouted, you clearly promised me. He'd promised her before, so she'd taken him to Madame Li's rooms to look for evidence. Why was he saying he wasn't sure now? What did he mean? He couldn't protect Yi. This was the first time someone had dared to speak so loudly to him. Long Fei said sternly, aren't the Han family and Han Yuni perfectly fine? Why are you in such a rush? Han Yunxi immediately backed away, unwilling to give up. Then what do you mean by that? It's the literal meaning. If there's nothing else, you can leave. Long Fei was vexed. Seeing this woman so agitated made him even more annoyed. He really didn't know why he wanted to protect her. In any case, she was the woman Emperor Tianhui had given him. If Emperor Tianhui wanted her, he could take her back. What was he worrying about? Han Yunqi didn't expect this at all. How could this guy be like this? She grew angry as well and slapped the table. You promised me, so you have to do it. Long Fei Yi's gaze rested on her hand before slowly moving up to meet her eyes. Very good. This woman had broken another record. Not only did she speak loudly to him, she even slapped the table. Your lordship will say it one last time. You, get out. Long Fei Yi's voice was icy. Han Yunqi wasn't afraid at all. She glared at him before flicking her sleeves and leaving. Chapter 142. Han Yunqi angrily left the palace and returned to Leisurely Cloud Pavilion. She almost bumped into Zhao Memar, who was walking towards her. Esteemed Wang Fei, what happened to you? Zhao Memar asked with concern. Of course, she knew that esteemed Wang Fei had just returned from His Highness's place. Han Yunqi had a belly full of anger and wanted to go upstairs without saying anything. Zhao Memar hurriedly stopped her. Esteemed Wang Fei, there's a letter for you. At this time, Han Yunqi stopped in her tracks. Letter? Who would write to her? In this world, she didn't seem to have any friends who wrote to her. Esteemed Wang Fei, which friend wrote to you? Zhao Memar asked curiously. This letter was delivered by a child and there was only 5 words on the envelope, to Qin Wang Fei. There was no other information. Zhao Memar was a very curious old lady, but in the end, she didn't have the guts to open it privately. Seeing Zhao Memar's curiosity, Han Yunqi casually snatched the envelope and went upstairs without saying a word. Who wrote to her? Han Yunqi was very curious. Who knew that when she opened it, she would find that it was from Jiyu Beiyu. He wanted to meet her at Ming Xiong Tea House tomorrow afternoon. That fellow should have left the palace. With that fellow's personality, if it wasn't for business, he would definitely use this method to ask her out. Only, did he want to meet her for a private matter? All right, she would know when she went tomorrow. At this time, Han Yunqi didn't have the heart to think too much. She walked to the window and looked at the brightly lit palace. Her heart felt stifled again. That hateful Long Fei Yi, why was he so fierce? She waited for him for 3 days and was met with a fierce response. He had clearly promised her, so couldn't she ask a few more questions to clarify things? Now that the Han family was indeed doing well, he had better ensure that the Han family would continue to do well. Otherwise, sooner or later, she would return the fierce response. That night, Han Yunqi was destined to lose sleep. The next day, she woke up at dawn and sat in the courtyard to make tea. Not long after, she saw Long Fei Yi about to leave. Cough cough. She deliberately coughed a few times. Long Fei Yi really stopped and turned around to look at her. Your Highness, would you like to have a cup of tea? She asked calmly, as if nothing had happened last night. However, Long Fei Yi refused without thinking. No need. After saying that, he put on his cloak and hurried out, as if he had something urgent to attend to. Han Yunqi still maintained a leisurely expression. However, as soon as Long Fei Yi's back disappeared, her eyes slowly narrowed. This guy. She had already taken the initiative to give in. What else did this fellow want? Couldn't he just sit down and have a good talk with her? If the Han family's matter was really difficult to deal with, she could understand and think of a solution together, right? She already knew about the spy, so what else was there to hide from her? If he left in a hurry, would it still be because of the spy case? Han Yunqi had always been a strong-willed person. Perhaps Long Fei Yi was the only one who could anger her. While she was huffing and puffing, she saw Chu Shifeng pass by. Han Yunqi immediately called out, Chu Shifeng, come here. Chu Shifeng immediately appeared in front of her. Esteemed Wang Fei, what orders do you have? Has His Highness been at the solitary enclosure or the palace these days? How's the progress on the spy case? Han Yunqi asked seriously. Chu Shifeng found himself in a difficult position. Although he was His Highness Duke of Qin's personal guard, he didn't know everything about the man. Moreover, even if he did, he couldn't speak carelessly. Keeping one's mouth shut was the most important profession for a servant. To reply, esteemed Wang Fei, this subordinate isn't clear, Chu Shifeng replied seriously. Still at the solitary enclosure? Did Han Ruoxue do the same? I don't think she knows anything about the poisoning, Han Yunxi asked next. Esteemed Wang Fei, this subordinate really doesn't know. How about you ask His Highness when he comes back? This subordinate still has. Chu Shifeng wanted to slip away, but Han Yunxi said lazily, could His Highness have gone to see the Emperor? I was planning to go to the palace as well, so I might as well go take a look. Chu Shifeng stopped at her words, his expression flustered. Esteemed Wang Fei, His Highness won't enter the palace today. It's better if you don't go. So he's at the solitary enclosure then? Han Yunxi pressed on. Chu Shifeng averted his gaze and hastily made up an excuse. Esteemed Wang Fei, today's the end of the bet. Aren't you going to pay attention to the situation at the general's estate? Did she need Chu Shifeng to remind her? Of course Han Yunxi knew what day it was. You still haven't answered my question, Han Yunxi pressed on. Esteemed Wang Fei, this subordinate really doesn't know a thing. Chu Shifeng couldn't take it anymore and disappeared before he finished. Han Yunxi knew that Chu Shifeng's mouth was tight, but she wasn't asking for any shameful secrets. Was there a need to be so secretive? Han Yunxi felt that something was off, but she couldn't figure it out. After breakfast, she rested a bit before leaving the house. As she passed by the general's estate, she saw a crowd of people crowding around the gates. There were 3 rings of people inside and outside, all of them talking and making a racket. The gates to the general's estate were shut tight. Even the side door was shut. Han Yunxi sucked in a cold breath. Although she knew that Mu Liuyu would be the center of attention today, it shouldn't be like this. However, on second thought, with Mu Liuyu's spoiled and arrogant temperament, she should have offended quite a few people. There were plenty of people who'd hit her while she was down. There must have been someone who'd take advantage of this opportunity to fan the flames and hit her while she was down. This matter had caused such a huge commotion that people had gathered at the entrance. Would Mu Liuyu come out? Was the great general really going to shield Mu Liuyu like this? Han Yunxi was filled with anticipation. She paused briefly before turning to leave. She didn't notice that a sedan chair was parked on the other side of the crowd. Princess Changping, who hadn't shown her face for a long time, was sitting inside. As soon as Princess Changping received Mu Liuyu's letter, she'd rushed to the capital. Unfortunately, the journey was too long and she'd only gotten back this morning. Originally, she'd planned to deal with Han Yunxi with Mu Liuyu, but who knew that Mu Liuyu had actually lost? At this moment, she lifted a corner of the curtain and looked at the commotion in front of her, her expression uncertain. She and Mu Liuyu had played together since childhood and could be said to be best friends among best friends. How could she allow Mu Liuyu to be bullied like this? Moreover, the one bullying Mu Liuyu wasn't just anyone, it was Han Yunxi, the person she hated the most. Princess, Miss Liuyu is too pitiful. Madame Li is a member of the Han family, so perhaps Han Yunxi already knew. That's why she purposely made a bet with Miss Liuyu. Servant Shuanghong guessed in a low voice. She'd received many benefits from Mu Liuyu and naturally had to speak up for her. Haha, Liuyu, that idiot, was set up. I don't know how the justice courts investigated this case, but in this princess's opinion, the Han family, including Han Yunxi, are all suspect. Princess Changping said angrily. Shuanghong was overjoyed and hurriedly said, Princess, today is the last day of the bet. If Qin Wangfei is suspicious, then can't we postpone the bet? Shuanghong's words woke her up. Princess Changping hurriedly had the carriage driver turn around and rush back to the palace. She wanted to beg her mother. If it didn't work, then she'd go directly to her imperial father to plead. Perhaps there was still hope for this matter. Princess Changping returned to the palace as quickly as possible and headed straight for the Empress. Imperial Mother, you must help Liu Yu. Moreover, if Han Yunxi really is suspicious, we can't let her off so easily. This is a good opportunity. Imperial Mother, this is our chance for revenge. Did you hear me? Princess Changping was simply a spoiled child. She tugged on the Empress's sleeve without any decorum. Enough. She's your big brother's savior, the Empress said unhappily. Of course Princess Changping knew this, but she didn't take it to heart. As she saw it, Han Yunshi being able to save her big brother Crown Prince was Han Yunshi's honor. After all, her big brother was going to be Tianning's emperor in the future. Mother, don't tell me you really think of her as your savior. If Han Yunshi could be used by the Empress Dowager, then the Empress would naturally treat her as her savior. But last time, the Empress Dowager had thrown out an olive branch, but Han Yunshi hadn't taken it seriously. Now the Empress Dowager was still holding a wait-and-see attitude towards that girl, so it wasn't good for her to make a move. Changping was someone who couldn't keep a secret. Naturally, the Empress wouldn't tell her that the Empress Dowager wanted to rope in Han Yunshi. Changping, the imperial harem doesn't involve itself in politics. Madame Li's case isn't something you and I can criticize, so don't get involved. Also, Mu Liuyu, that girl, is a busybody. Don't mix with her. The Empress warned seriously. How could Princess Changping listen? She stamped her foot and ran off. She was going to find imperial father. Unexpectedly, Princess Changping was stopped by Eunuch Shui as soon as she reached the imperial study. Princess, His Majesty is currently receiving a guest. If there's anything, come back another day. It'll be too late if I come another day. Out of the way. Even the Crown Prince had to respect Eunuch Shui, but Princess Changping was very arrogant. Eunuch Shui was used to it, but still stopped her and said in a low voice, Princess, that's an honored guest from Western Jew. Eunuch Shui lowered his voice even further. Western Jews? Crown Prince Yi. Princess Changping was startled by these words and blurted out, his little sister came too? For the sake of the marriage? Tianning and Western Jew were allied by marriage. Generations of marriage alliances had always happened, but in the past, it was always Tianning's princess or Junju who married off to the distant Western Jew. Princess Changping heard that this time, Western Jew's Princess Rongla wanted to marry into Tianning, but it wasn't clear who the bride would be. This Princess Rongla was extraordinary. She was of noble birth as the daughter of Western Jew's Empress and the Crown Prince's younger sister. Moreover, she was as beautiful as a flower and excelled in both civil and martial arts. She was known as the only woman in Cloud Realm continent who excelled in all three aspects. Currently, there were two guesses in the imperial court. Some guessed that Princess Rongla would marry Crown Prince Long Tianmo and become Tianning's next empress. Others guessed that she would marry her senior martial brother from the same sect, His Highness Duke of Qin. The Duke of Qin's estate would then have two official consorts. No matter who this princess married, it would push Western Jew and Tianning's cooperation to the next level. Of course, Princess Changping wanted nothing more than for Duanmu Yarrow to marry Imperial Uncle Qin immediately. That way, Han Yunshi's days would be difficult. Becoming the Duke of Qin's official consort with such an outstanding woman required more than just courage. Princess Rongla came as well. His Highness Duke of Qin should be accompanying her right now. As for whether she came for the marriage, this old servant isn't sure, Eunuch Shui said with a smile. Imperial Uncle Qin is accompanying her? Princess Changping was astonished. Ever since she was young, she'd never heard of Imperial Uncle Qin accompanying any woman. Eunuch Shui nodded his head mysteriously. He'd been wondering about this all this time as well. Yesterday, His Highness Duke of Qin and the Emperor had been talking behind closed doors about Madame Li's case, but he wasn't clear on the specifics. Who knew that Princess Rongla would be taken away by the Duke of Qin after coming to see the Emperor today? As he saw it, the Duke of Qin and Princess Rongla had a chance. Chapter 143. Seeing Eunuch Shui's mysterious expression, Princess Changping was secretly delighted. There's a chance. Eunuch Shui smiled but didn't say anything. Princess Changping was even more certain and was overjoyed. Compared to Mu Liuyue's bet, she was much more interested in Rongla's matter. Of course, since her best friend was in trouble, she still had to help. Moreover, her best friend was her beloved's younger sister. Eunuch Shui, I must see Imperial Father today. Please help me think of a way, Princess Changping said anxiously. One had to know that regardless of whether Mu Liuyu acted shamelessly and didn't fulfill the bet or took off her clothes to run around the streets, after today, it would be too late. Mu Liuyue's reputation would definitely be ruined. Who knew that just as eunuch Shui was in a difficult position, Shuanghong ran over with a flustered expression. She whispered something into Princess Changping's ear, causing the princess's expression to change greatly. Ah! With a loud cry, she turned and ran away, not bothering to say anything more to eunuch Shui. Shuanghong said the general's residence was open. Someone stood out. It was none other than Mu Liuyue's older brother, young General Mu Qingwu. When Princess Changping rushed to the general's residence, the entire place was surrounded by spectators. Mu Qingwu was standing at the entrance, preparing to take off his outer robes. He had just explained to everyone that Mu Liuyu had fallen ill ever since she came back that day, so she couldn't fulfill the bet. Since the deadline was up, he would replace Mu Liuyu and take off her clothes to run around the streets. Even if he was a grown man, standing at the entrance and taking off his clothes in front of so many people was a very humiliating matter. The crowd exploded into discussion, with many people protesting loudly. Mu Liuyu, come out! Come out! A girl who doesn't keep her word, what qualifications does she have to be the general's daughter? Mu Liuyu must be faking her illness. Why should she let someone else replace her? That doesn't count. Great general, there's no joking in the military. Could it be that you're going to indulge your daughter like this? This is too fake. If you don't believe what you say, then don't bet if you can't afford it. Gradually, Mu Qingwu became the target of the protests. Young general, don't run. It doesn't count even if you run. Hehe, young general, don't take it off. If you take it off, no one will look. Young general, a person like your sister is not worth it for you to do this. Wake up. When Princess Changping heard these words and saw Qingwu Gij whom she hadn't seen in a long time, her heart ached so much that she almost couldn't breathe. She stood far away, tears streaming down her face. She truly hated Han Yunxi. It was all Han Yunxi's fault. Without Han Yunxi, there wouldn't have been that bet, and Qingwu Gij wouldn't have ended up like this. At this moment, Han Yunxi was also in the crowd. Her brows were tightly knitted, and she silently bit her lip. She had guessed that Mu Liuyu would continue faking her illness, but she hadn't expected Mu Qingwu to replace Mu Liuyu to fulfill the bet. There was no need to mention Mu Liuyue's nature. In fact, regardless of whether she ran or not, her reputation was already ruined. Now, based on Mu Qingwu's integrity, perhaps it was time for the bet to come to an end. Han Yunxi was about to go forward when Princess Changping suddenly rushed out from the crowd and hugged Mu Qingwu's arm. Qingwu Gij, I won't allow you to do this. You won't. You won't. Changping was back. Han Yunxi was very surprised and stepped back. Mu Qingwu was also very surprised, but he quickly pushed Princess Changping's arm away. In a low voice, he said, Princess, men and women shouldn't touch each other. Please conduct yourself with dignity. Princess Changping wasn't afraid of the heavens or the earth, but she was afraid of Mu Qingwu. She didn't listen to anyone but Mu Qingwu. She didn't dare to move, but looked tearfully at Mu Qingwu. I won't allow you to do this, I won't allow it. Princess Changping's appearance caused the entire crowd to quiet down. A complicated look flashed through Mu Qingwu's eyes. He lowered his voice and said very seriously, Princess, everyone is watching. Don't cause trouble. I'm not causing trouble. Madam Li is a member of the Han family. Maybe Han Yunxi, however, before Princess Changping could finish her words, Mu Qingwu's gaze suddenly became sharp, scaring her into laughing more and more. She didn't even dare to continue. She had never seen Qingwu Gij so fierce before. It was as if she had committed an unforgivable mistake. Let's end the bet here. If we continue, the matter of the traitor will be exposed. The impact will be even greater and the Duke of Qin and the Emperor will be even more difficult to deal with. Now that everyone was watching, Mu Qingwu had no choice but to be serious. Seeing Princess Changping shut up, Mu Qingwu raised his head and looked forward. His gaze was bright and open. Everyone, please see clearly. The people of my general's residence will do it. After he finished speaking, He unbuttoned his shirt and took off his outer robes without hesitation. He was wearing a white robe and black boots. His tall and thin figure, standing in a strong military posture, gave people a feeling of openness and uprightness. For a moment, all the mocking and taunting voices, all the questioning and mocking gazes turned into reverence. Mu Qingwu, a true man. Princess Changping covered her mouth as she stared blankly. At this moment, her heart felt like it was being cut by a knife. But besides her heartache, she also felt an inexplicable sense of pride. She was even more determined to marry no one but Mu Qingwu in this lifetime. Han Yunxi watched silently. She knew that there was no longer any need for her to step out and stop them. No one would be able to stop them. Mu Qingwu walked down the steps step by step as the crowd parted to make a path for him. As soon as Mu Qingwu walked down the last step, he immediately broke into a run. He passed through the throng of people and ran into Xuanwu Street. Along the way, there were countless commoners on both sides of the street. Everyone stopped to watch this scene, and quite a few even chased after Mu Qingwu's footsteps. In an instant, the entire streets of Tianning's capital were empty. From that day onwards, Mu Qingwu became a man revered by everyone. It was also from that day onwards that Mu Liuyue's reputation took a nosedive. Many daughters of influential families no longer had any dealings with her. Of course, this was a story for another day. Han Yunxi blended into the crowd and chased after Mu Qingwu. But as she chased after him, she suddenly stopped in her tracks. She had clearly seen a very familiar figure in the window of a tea house by the side of the road. Long Fei Yi. Although he was dressed in a low-key manner, Han Yunxi still recognized him at a glance. It was him, that's right. So this fellow was here. She had foolishly assumed that he was either at the solitary enclosure or in the palace, busy with the matter of the traitor. Who knew that he had so much free time that he'd run over to a tea house to drink tea? Actually, the matter of the traitor had nothing to do with her. Even if Long Fei Yi stopped investigating the masked man, she didn't care. She only cared about the Han clan's crimes. This fellow still couldn't give her a satisfactory answer, so he was in the mood for leisure. Wasn't he going too far? Han Yunxi looked carefully and discovered that Long Fei Yi seemed to be talking. Could it be that there was someone across from him? The window of the private room was on the second floor, so Han Yunxi could barely see Long Fei Yi from where she was standing. She immediately climbed to the second floor of the tea house behind her to confirm that there was someone across from Long Fei Yi. Unfortunately, she couldn't see who was across from Long Fei Yi no matter how many windows she tried. Who could it be? Someone who could drink tea with Long Fei Yi couldn't be a simple person. Could it be an important guest? But if it was an important guest, why would he be in a tea house on the main street? Han Yunxi became more and more suspicious. In the end, she decided to go to the tea house across the street to take a look. But just as she was about to leave, Long Fei Yi stood up. They were about to leave. Han Yunxi became nervous. She leaned on the windowsill and didn't move. When she saw Long Fei Yi disappear from the window, her gaze immediately shifted to the entrance of the tea house downstairs. She held her breath and waited. After a while, Long Fei Yi walked out, and behind him was, Han Yunxi's eyes widened. She suddenly raised her hand and covered her mouth. She was so shocked that she couldn't speak. It was too unbelievable, too unexpected. Long Fei Yi's important guest was actually her. Duanmu Yarrow. Western Jew's Princess Rongla, Duanmu Yarrow. So Long Fei Yi was drinking tea and strolling through the streets with a beauty? Was that why Long Fei Yi had been too busy to deal with the Han clan's accusations over the past few days to give her a definite answer? That's why Chu Shifeng was so hesitant to speak when I interrogated him this morning. Was he too afraid to speak? After they left the tea house, Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yarrow walked side by side. It was obvious that Duanmu Yarrow had dressed herself up very carefully. Her face was wreathed in spring breeze as she spoke with a smile. It seemed like she and Long Fei Yi were discussing Mu Qingwu's run through the streets. Long Fei Yi wasn't as cold as usual, but kept responding to her. The two of them walked along the side of the street. Han Yunxi was both shocked and furious. Without a second thought, she rushed down the stairs and shoved aside a few people blocking her way to chase after them. But for some reason, she stopped in her tracks. Her thoughts were unclear, but she suddenly darted into a small alley on the side, then returned to Xuanwu Street through the alley in front of Long Fei's group. She stopped and took a deep breath before standing there, waiting for them to catch up. Actually, if you asked Han Yunxi what she was doing, she wouldn't be able to answer. She didn't even think before she did as she was told. Although Mu Qingwu had just run past them, the streets were still crowded with people. Occasionally, they bumped into each other, but Han Yunxi didn't care. She stood there stubbornly. Finally, she saw Long Fei Yi's group walking towards her, getting closer and closer. Finally, they were just a step away from each other. Of course, Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yarrow saw her too. However, Long Fei Yi's gaze only lingered on her face for a second before he looked away. He walked past her expressionlessly like a passerby. At this moment, Han Yunxi felt as though her heart had been struck by something. She was caught off guard and didn't know what was wrong with her. Duanmu Yarrow was surprised to see Han Yunxi by chance, but when she saw that Long Fei Yi didn't greet her, she felt smug. She lifted her chin high and shot Han Yunxi a provocative look. As she strode past her, she deliberately bumped into her. Duanmu Yarrow was a martial arts practitioner. How much force did she use? Han Yunxi lost her footing and stumbled. She fell, startling the people around her. "Miss, are you all right? Miss, get up quickly. Are you all right?" Hearing the commotion behind him, Long Fei Yi paused for a moment. However, he quickly continued walking. Duanmu Yarrow hurried after him and complained, "Senior brother, slow down. There are too many people. I'll get lost." Long Fei Yi didn't reply, nor did he slow down. However, Duanmu Yarrow was still smiling like a flower. She was in a good mood and tried her best to keep up with him. Senior brother had promised to accompany her the whole day as a good host. She didn't dare ask for anything more. Han Yunxi was helped up by a kind-hearted passerby. She looked at the departing figure with a heavy heart. She clenched her fists until they hurt. "Long Fei Yi, what's your relationship with Duanmu Yarrow?" Chapter 144. Han Yunxi stood there in a daze. No matter how the passers-by asked, she didn't respond. Until the familiar figure in front of her disappeared, she finally regained her senses from her own world. At this moment, the passers-by had all dispersed. However, even though she had regained her senses, her heart still felt stifled and uncomfortable. Between Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yarrow, between senior brother and junior sister, could it be that there was really something going on? Otherwise, why would that fellow who never gave anyone an exception put down his status and accompany Duanmu Yarrow shopping? This was too unlike his style. When they were fighting against the poisonous python, Long Fei Yi was so anxious to protect Duanmu Yarrow's life. However, when they were in the Medicine Ghost Valley, Long Fei Yi didn't show any favoritism. Instead, he was more biased towards her. However, the reason why he was biased towards her back then was because they had the same goal, which was the lifeblood pill. If he didn't shoulder the Emperor's order back then, would he still stand on her side? As Han Yunxi thought and thought, she started to laugh. She laughed lightly at herself. What was wrong with her? She was only Long Fei Yi's princess consort in name. What did the relationship between him and his junior sister have to do with her? Senior brother and junior sister were originally in love with each other. What was so strange about it? Thinking of this, Han Yunxi took a deep breath to calm herself down. She even tried her best to pull up the corners of her mouth, revealing an open-minded smile. She maintained her smile and suddenly turned around. She wasn't going to walk in the same direction as them, who knew that when she turned around, her movement was too big and she directly bumped into the person behind her. Han Yunxi was about to apologize when he knew that the person fiercely pushed her. "Are you looking for death? How dare you bump into this young master?" Han Yunxi focused and saw that the other party was a rich family's eldest young master. His figure was bloated and there was a folding fan at the back of his head. He looked like a silk pants. Seeing Han Yunxi's appearance, the fat young master had evil intentions. Coldly, he said, "What are you looking at? Don't you have eyes? Can't you see that there's someone behind you?" Do you think that everyone is like you, with eyes on the back of their head? Han Yunshi was still smiling. Ayo, this little girl's mouth is quite sharp. As the fat young master spoke, he took off his folding fan and reached out to Han Yunshi's chin. But who knew that before he could touch her, Han Yunshi raised her hand and opened the folding fan. Just as she raised her hand, she sprinkled something on the fat young master's face. The fat young master smelled a delicate fragrance and subconsciously sniffed hard. Who would have thought that after smelling it, he would actually start laughing foolishly? He stood where he was and started taking off his clothes. At this time, the smile on Han Yunshi's face finally disappeared and was replaced by a gloomy face. She didn't even look at the fat young master and turned to leave. She was full of anger. Didn't this blind thing see that she was in a bad mood? He actually dared to provoke her at this time. He was simply courting death. Well, she admitted she was in a terrible mood. With her back to the Long Fei Yi's direction, Han Yunshi wandered aimlessly on the street. It wasn't until the evening when she heard the drums from the Hugua temple in the distance that she remembered something important. She had an appointment with Jiyu Beiyu in the afternoon. It was 4.5 hours before the appointed time. Han Yunshi didn't think much and directly rushed to the Ming Xiong tea house. As soon as she entered the private room, she saw that Jiyu Beiyu was still waiting for her. She immediately apologized. "I'm sorry, I'm late." However, Jiyu Beiyu not only didn't blame her, but also quickly poured a cup of water for her. "It's this one's honor that the princess consort can come. Drink a cup of water first, there's no hurry." No hurry. She was late for so long, but this guy still said there was no hurry. His temper was too good. Even if there was a difference in status, she really couldn't see the slightest bit of complaint from his gentle eyes. Every time she saw his gentle eyes, Han Yunshi always thought, "I wonder what kind of girl in this world would have such good fortune to be able to marry this guy." Han Yunshi drank a few mouthfuls of water and quickly discovered that Jiyu Beiyu's complexion wasn't right. Although she was a poison doctor, she was still a doctor. Looking at Jiyu Beiyu's complexion, it seemed like he was seriously ill and had just recovered a little. He really needed to recuperate. "Jiyu Beiyu, what happened to you?" Han Yunshi was anxious and directly called out his name. "I was too tired a few days ago. When I left the palace, I caught a cold and became seriously ill." Jiyu Beiyu lightly replied. "A cold?" Han Yunshi was suspicious. Although doctors didn't treat themselves, but for a common illness like a cold, how could it be difficult for Jiyu Beiyu? Moreover, based on his complexion, it was clear that something was wrong. This guy wouldn't be hiding something, right? Han Yunshi was suspicious in her heart. She indicated for Jiyu Beiyu to reach out and take his pulse. "Let me take a look." "Many thanks for Princess Consort's concern. It's just a cold, it's not a big deal." Jiyu Beiyu politely declined. "Hand, let me take a look." Han Yunshi was very serious. Jiyu Beiyu had no choice but to roll up his sleeves and place his arm on the table. Han Yunshi seriously took his pulse and her beautiful brows tightly knit together. His pulse was very, very weak. It even seemed like his vitality had been greatly damaged. But it was just as Jiyu Beiyu said, the cold had entered his body and there were no other signs of his pulse. Strange, Han Yunshi seriously looked at him again. This kind of weak appearance was more like the state after being poisoned. "Imperial physician Jiyu, a cold can make you this weak? Isn't the foundation of your body a little too weak?" Han Yunshi asked curiously. Unexpectedly, Jiyu Beiyu only nodded. "This official has been a pot of medicine since childhood. My body can be considered healthy now, but it was common for me to get seriously ill every 2 or 3 days when I was younger. A few days ago, I served His Majesty in the palace and didn't rest or sleep for days on end. As soon as this cold entered my body, I fell ill like a collapsing mountain." He was actually a pot of medicine. Han Yunshi was very surprised. She never expected Tianning country's chief imperial physician to be so sickly. If Jiyu Beiyu didn't say anything, who would have known? "Could it be that you fell ill when you were young?" Han Yunshi asked. Jiyu Beiyu's eyes flashed with bitterness before he said mildly, "I heard grandfather say that I was born prematurely and was forced to use medicine to keep me alive. Now Han Yunshi was even more shocked, but also relieved. No wonder. In ancient times, premature babies had a very small chance of survival. Fortunately, this fellow had reincarnated right and had a divine doctor grandfather. Otherwise, even if they had medicine, they wouldn't know how to raise him. Han Yunshi only knew that Jiyu Beiyue's grandfather had brought him from the medical academy to Tianning's capital. As for his parents, she didn't know. Of course, she wasn't curious enough to ask about their origins. She teased with a smile, "Looks like you'll have to ask His Majesty to reduce your workload." Jiyu Beiyu smiled faintly. Even though his face was pale, his smile was as warm as an April spring breeze. "Esteemed Wang Fei, the matter you asked this one to look into last time, how is it?" Han Yunshi grew excited. So this was the reason why this fellow had asked her to come here. She'd asked him to investigate how Han Konggan had become a director of Cloud Realm Medical Academy in the past. She wanted to find out if Lady Tianxin had any connections with the medical academy. Seeing Han Yunshi so agitated, Jiyu Beiyu hesitated a little before continuing. "Esteemed Wang Fei, I'm very sorry. Cloud Realm Medical Academy's directors have all heard of Lady Tianxin, but they don't know her." Han Yunshi was stunned by his words. Lady Tianxin's name had spread throughout Tianning's capital in the past. She'd even agreed to let Han Konggan become a director of Cloud Realm Medical Academy. She'd assumed that Lady Tianxin had excellent connections within the academy. Who knew things would turn out like this? A director was considered a mid-level position in the medical academy. Above that were many important people with important positions. Perhaps they'd know Lady Tianxin, who had the confidence to make Han Konggan a director. If she was looking for connections, she'd have to find someone above that, right? Then do the Council of Elders and the Academy head know my mother? Han Yunshi asked anxiously. Jiyu Beiyu laughed at her words. "Esteemed Wang Fei, this one can only find out this much. When my grandfather was still alive, he'd only seen the Medical Academy's elders a few times. Esteemed Wang Fei, perhaps Lady Tianxin really has nothing to do with the Medical Academy. With Lady Tianxin's power, it wouldn't be hard for her to support Han Konggan. Han Konggan's medical skills were indeed worthy of a director position in the past," Jiyu Beiyu analyzed objectively. All right, Han Yunshi knew she'd been impulsive, but this was the only clue to Lady Tianxin's identity. She was impatient. After drinking a few cups of tea in silence, Han Yunshi stopped making things difficult for Jiyu Beiyu. After all, this matter couldn't be rushed. She asked offhandedly, "You invited me here just for this?" "There's one more thing." Jiyu Beiyu was a little embarrassed. Han Yunshi knew that her intuition wouldn't be wrong. This guy had invited her in private, so there must be something else. "There's no one else here. Speak." She smiled faintly. Jiyu Beiyue's smile was extremely bashful, and especially cute. Even though he was bashful, he was serious. "Esteemed Wang Fei, this one heard about your bet with Miss Liu Yu, so I'm curious how you knew to use goldfish to test for the 10,000 snake poison." The spectators that day didn't know, but Jiyu Beiyu was a doctor. He knew, and because he knew, he could tell that something was amiss. To be exact, there were two ways to test for poison. One was to test for poison, and the other was to test for poison. Testing for poison was the job of a poison master. Through smelling, tasting, and even reacting with other poisons, normal people wouldn't be able to understand the principles behind it. Testing for poison, on the other hand, was to use poison testing stones or people to test for poison. This was for amateurs to see. The 10,000 snake poison was very special, and the dosage in the tea leaves was very small. How did this woman know to test it with goldfish? Han Yunshi smiled when she heard this. Not long ago, Jiyu had also made a special trip to the Duke of Qin's residence to ask her this question. Even though Jiyu Beiyu didn't know much about poisons, he was still worthy of being called a godly doctor. Towards Jiyu Beiyu, Han Yunshi inexplicably let down her guard. She answered generously, "I once saw it in an ancient book. Fortunately, I remembered it." "Is it an ancient book left behind by Madame Tianxin?" Jiyu Beiyu pursued. "Ah. All right," she used Madame Tianxin as a shield to block all those who doubted her, so she might as well use it all the way. Yes, it was left behind by my mother. It seems that Madame Tianxin was also a poison master. Jiyu Beiyu said seriously. To tell a lie, one could only use countless lies to cover it up. Han Yunxi's mouth twitched, and she continued to nod. I think so. It's just that she didn't have the chance to show it. Han Yunxi didn't want to continue this topic. She rubbed her stomach and smiled. I'm late today. Let me treat you to a meal. Jiyu Beiyu wanted to reject immediately, but Han Yunxi was faster than him. She shouted, Waiter, waiter, bring the menu over. The waiter quickly opened the door and came in. Jiyu Beiyu couldn't reject him. Mingxiang Tea House had a wide variety of snacks that could be eaten as a main meal. This was Han Yunxi's first time eating outside. She ordered a lot of snacks in one go. Jiyu Beiyu looked at her. His eyes flashed with affection, but he didn't interfere. Soon, the dishes were delivered. However, the person who delivered the dishes shocked Han Yunxi so much that she almost fell off her chair. Who was it? In fact, he just happened to pass by and saw Han Yunxi by chance. He didn't really want to pester her. He was not an idle person. All right. Poison lass, just treat me to a meal as repayment for saving your life. Jiyu Chishao turned serious. However, when this guy was serious, he was still not serious no matter how one looked at him. Is it so easy to repay your life-saving grace? Just a meal and we'll be done with it. Han Yunxi couldn't wait to get rid of this guy. Jiyu pondered for a long time before he said with a serious face, if you want to repay me with your body, that's also possible. As soon as his voice fell, Han Yunxi raised her hand to slap him. At the same time, Jiyu Beiyu fiercely slammed the table, impudent. Jiyu grabbed Han Yunxi's hand. His narrow eyes slightly narrowed as he arrogantly glanced at Jiyu Beiyu. Jiyu Beiyu's killing intent surged. This guy looked like he was all smiles, but he was not simple at all. In a moment, the atmosphere became tense. However, Jiyu Beiyu was not afraid. He stood up and said in a cold voice, This young master, please let go of the Princess Consort's hand immediately. Han Yunxi did not expect that the gentle Jiyu Beiyu would have such a fierce side. She recovered her senses and suddenly broke free from Gu's hand. She also stood up, Imperial Physician Jiyu, let's go. Han Yunxi wanted to summon the authorities and charge this guy with harassment. At the same time, she could also close his shop. He had many shops, so she didn't mind closing everyone she saw. However, Jiyu Beiyu was also present this time. Although there was nothing wrong with meeting in private, it was still against the rules. She was not afraid of being criticized, but she couldn't implicate Jiyu Beiyu. If Jiyu made a big deal out of this, what would Jiyu Beiyu do? Han Yunxi walked very quickly. Jiyu Beiyu hurried to keep up, but they hadn't gone far when they bumped into Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yarrow walking over. What a small world. Han Yunxi stopped abruptly. This time, Long Fei Yi also stopped. He glanced at Jiyu Beiyu, a trace of surprise flashing in his eyes. Han Yunxi glanced at Duanmu Yarrow. Were they here to eat? His Highness Duke of Qin sure had a lot of free time to accompany Duanmu Yarrow for an entire day. Duanmu Yarrow looked at Han Yunxi, then at the white-robed Jiyu Beiyu next to her. She didn't know Jiyu Beiyu, but she felt that this man was extraordinarily handsome and as gentle as jade. He was a perfect match for Han Yunxi. Jiyu Beiyu, on the other hand, recognized Duanmu Yarrow. He was puzzled. Why would His Highness Duke of Qin come to a tea house with Princess Rongla? Thus, the four of them fell silent, each with their own thoughts. Han Yunxi and Long Fei Yi's eyes met. One's eyes were silent, while the others were frighteningly deep. In this moment of silence, Jiyu walked out of the room with a devilish smile. Aya, what wind is blowing over here today? Even the Qin, unexpectedly, before he could finish speaking, Han Yunxi suddenly turned around with a smile. Jiyu, didn't we say we were going to eat together? Let's go in. As she spoke, she dragged Jiyu Beiyu along. Imperial Physician Jiyu, let's go together. I've troubled you several times, but I haven't had a chance to thank you yet. What was going on? Ji-yu didn't understand, and Ji-yu Bei-yu didn't even have the time to react before Han Yunshi pulled the two of them into a private room. Han Yunshi turned around after entering the room. She didn't spare Long Fei-yi another glance before slamming the door shut without hesitation. As soon as the door closed, she leaned against it and took several deep breaths. This time, she'd managed to dump Long Fei-yi before he could dump her. This feeling was amazing. Ji-yu and Ji-yu Bei-yu, who'd been pushed in by her, looked at each other in dismay. They sized up this woman suspiciously. What was she doing? Why did she need to take deep breaths just to close the door like a battle? Esteemed Wang Fei, this isn't appropriate. His Highness, Ji-yu Bei-yu was a bit uneasy. His Highness is very busy, so let's not disturb him any longer. Let's eat. Come, let's all eat. Han Yunshi acted out of character and began to move her chopsticks carelessly. Ji-yu Bei-yu's brows furrowed even more as he watched. Meanwhile, Ji-yu rubbed his chin playfully, as if he'd understood something. He smiled and sat down. Poison lass, that person just now was Western Jew's Princess Rongla, right? Han Yunshi's chopsticks paused for a moment before she nodded. Millimeter, I heard that Western Jew's emperor has plans for Princess Rongla to marry into Tianning country. It looks like Princess Rongla is here to find the Prince Consort this time, Ji-yu teased. This time, Han Yunshi even paused in her chewing, but she quickly resumed chewing in large bites. As she ate, she said, it's a marriage for peace, not for a groom. There's no use in finding a groom. It's not up to her to decide who she marries. This is the princess of the first wife, the younger sister of Western Jew's crown prince. If she's going to marry into Tianning, there's no way she'll be able to escape the selection. Gu's scorching gaze was fixed on Han Yunshi's small, moving mouth. Even the way this woman ate was different from other women. The more he looked at her, the more he liked her. When would the Long Fei-yi divorce her? How about he just let her divorce the Long Fei-yi? Han Yunshi really didn't know much about the marriage for peace. She feigned indifference as she asked, who are the candidates? At this moment, Ji-yu Bei-yu had also sat down on one side and was seriously sizing up Ji-yu. He didn't interrupt the conversation. What's the relationship between esteemed Wang Fei and this guy? From the looks of it, they don't seem to be bad friends. The crown prince, the young general, and Ji-yu purposely paused before continuing, the Duke of Qin. Han Yunshi gave Ji-yu a deep look and chuckled. She abruptly stopped the topic. Eat. As she spoke, she glanced at Ji-yu Bei-yu. Imperial physician Ji-yu, there's no need to stand on ceremony. Let's eat. Duanmu Yarrow was going to marry the Long Fei-yi. She was the princess of the first wife, not Lady Shu. How could she be willing to be a concubine? It looked like Duanmu Yarrow had a high chance of marrying the crown prince. She was destined to call Long Fei-yi imperial uncle and call Ji-yu Bei-yu imperial aunt. Thinking of this, Han Yunshi's bad mood suddenly vanished like smoke in thin air. She picked up a sparkling and translucent chestnut cake and admired it with interest. Unexpectedly, Ji-yu muttered to himself, I've heard that this princess is well versed in literature, martial arts, and looks. She's extremely ambitious. I'm sure she won't look at anyone other than the Duke of Qin. It's very likely that the Duke of Qin's estate will have two main consorts. Two main consorts? Why didn't Han Yunshi think of this? After all, even the Empress had appeared in the East and West palaces, what more a princess consort? It was said that although the East and West palaces and the Left and Right palaces were both main consorts, there was still a hierarchy between them. This time, Han Yunshi's hands and mouth completely froze. A complicated look flitted across Gu's eyes, but he still teased in a probing tone, Come, esteemed Wang Fei. This chestnut cake should be dipped in vinegar. It's flavorful. How could Han Yunshi not understand Gu's meaning? She only smiled faintly and didn't say anything else. What did it have to do with her whether he married or she married? She was only angry because he didn't keep his promise. Han Yunshi ignored Gu's probing. She hadn't eaten much before she lost her appetite and rose to her feet. You guys enjoy your meal, she said. I'll be leaving first. She opened the door and saw that Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yarrow hadn't entered their private room, but were sitting in the middle of the main hall, closest to her private room. Long Fei Yi's naturally cold eyes grew even colder, but Han Yunqi only glanced at him briefly before looking straight ahead and leaving with large strides. Her back was stubborn and lonely. Long Fei Yi's gaze followed her down the stairs, his eyes cold and complicated beyond comprehension. Duanmu Yarrow saw it all and couldn't accept it. "Senior brother, let's eat. The food's getting cold." There was clearly a private room, but senior brother insisted on sitting here. After sitting for so long, he hadn't touched a single bite of the food on the table. Although he'd been ordered by Emperor Tianhui to accompany her and act as a host, he'd been taciturn and cold the entire way. She'd long gotten used to his cold personality, but he'd grown even more taciturn after meeting Han Yunqi at noon. Was it that woman who'd disturbed his heart? She'd already asked around last time at the Medicine Ghost Valley. Chapter 146. After going out for a day, Han Yunqi was summoned by Grand Concubine Yi as soon as she returned to the estate. After treating the poison last time, she'd already performed acupuncture on Grand Concubine Yi twice. This would be the last time. Grand Concubine Yi truly cherished her life, so she couldn't afford to be careless. Murong Wanru had been punished to reflect on her mistakes behind closed doors, so Han Yunqi was especially quiet every time she came. She could talk to Grand Concubine Yi without any misgivings. Grand Concubine Yi lay lazily on the chaise lounge with Han Yunqi sitting by her side. Although her heart was heavy with worry, she quickly entered the state of mind as soon as she picked up the needles, concentrating wholeheartedly. Some doctors would get distracted and chat while treating patients, but she didn't like it. No matter if it was a difficult illness or something as simple as turning over a palm, she was always serious. Her attitude alone was like a good medicine that calmed the patient down and set their mind at ease. After an hour, Han Yunqi withdrew her needles one by one before speaking. "Mu Fei, the remaining poison in your body has been cleansed. There won't be any side effects, so you can set your mind at ease." Grand Concubine Yi nodded. Although she was calm and collected, her posture languid and leisurely, her heart was filled with joy. She could finally stop worrying about her body. Seeing her so calm, Han Yunqi's eyes flashed with craftiness. "Actually, things like acupuncture and moxibustion are good for you too. It can expel poison and nourish your skin. At Mu Fei's age, your body must have accumulated plenty of toxins. Although they're not fatal, they'll settle on your skin and make it look dull. You might even develop brown spots." Hearing this, Grand Concubine Yi's eyes brightened with excitement. In the circle of noble women at her age, the most talked about topic was her face. In a few years, it'd be her body's condition. "In other words, you seem to be very good at it." Grand Concubine Yi probed. "I can't say I'm good at it, but if I follow the procedures, there'll be results. Expelling poison and nourishing the skin can also prolong one's life." Han Yunqi was very modest. She wasn't trying to advertise, but expelling poison and nourishing the skin was a piece of cake for her. At these words, Grand Concubine Yi could no longer keep her calm. Hastily, she said, "Then why don't we try a course of treatment for Mu Fei first? It's Chunxie's honor. Tomorrow, I'll write up a treatment plan and have someone deliver it for Mu Fei to look over." Han Yunqi was very happy. This was a chance to get closer to Grand Concubine Yi. The closer she got to Grand Concubine Yi, the more dangerous it would be for Murong Wanru. Grand Concubine Yi was in a great mood. She stretched her neck as she asked, "I heard that Mu Qingwu took Mu Lua's place to honor the bet today? Fortunately, I won." Otherwise, Han Yunqi chuckled softly, but didn't continue. Grand Concubine Yi probably wanted her to lose back then. If she lost, she'd have to fulfill her promise and ruin her reputation. Then the Duke of Qin could divorce her. Of course Grand Concubine Yi remembered that she'd hit someone while they were down, but it seemed she'd done it too many times. Instead of feeling awkward, she admonished, "I haven't taught you a lesson about this yet. In the future, don't make these kinds of bets with others. If you lose, you'll suffer a loss. Yi, The grand concubine Yi who wanted her to suffer was actually lecturing her like this. Han Yunshi felt overwhelmed by favor from superior. It looked like her poison-expelling diplomacy was starting to take effect. It doesn't matter if Chunxie suffers a loss. But this time, someone with ulterior motives used the Han family incident to implicate Mu Fei. Chunxie truly deserves 10,000 deaths. As Han Yunshi spoke, she added, speaking of which, it's strange. Just who gave Lady Shu the guts? Was she targeting Chunxie, or Mu Fei? Grand concubine Yi would have forgotten about Lady Shu's affairs if Han Yunshi hadn't brought it up. She wasn't suspicious, but certain that a trifling Lady Shu had someone backing her up. Seeing Grand concubine Yi remain silent, Han Yunshi added, actually, no matter if she was targeting Chunxie or Mu Fei, she was still targeting the Duke of Qin's estate. But Chunxie can't figure it out. Who in the world would have the guts to target the Duke of Qin's estate? Or perhaps, as she spoke, she gave Grand concubine Yi a meaningful look. Or perhaps, she was just targeting Chunxie to sow discord between Chunxie and Mu Fei? At this, Grand concubine Yi knitted her brows and looked seriously at Han Yunshi. Grand concubine Yi had once suspected that the person behind Lady Shu was that person from the palace. After all, the only person in the world who dared to provoke her Duke of Qin's estate was that person. But she quickly rejected the idea, because that person in the palace was interested in roping in Han Yunshi. She wouldn't go so far as to make a move against Han Yunshi. Now that she heard Han Yunshi's guesses, could it be that the person behind Lady Shu was her own family, Wanru? But soon enough, Grand concubine Yi rejected the idea as well. Wanru was suspicious, but she still couldn't believe that she'd have the guts to do such a thing. Perhaps Han Yunshi was trying to sow discord right now. Grand concubine Yi withdrew her gaze and lay back lazily. What's done is done. There's no point in looking into it. It's better if you don't stir up trouble in the future. As expected, Grand concubine Yi wasn't easy to deal with. Han Yunshi sighed with emotion in her heart. Chunxie was just saying. Actually, guessing here and there won't yield any results. It's better to go to the prisons and interrogate Lady Shu. So speaking, she rose to her feet. Mu Fei, it's getting late. Chunxie should go back as well. Grand concubine Yi didn't urge her to stay, but waved a hand to dismiss her. Still, Han Yunshi's last words had planted a seed of restlessness in her heart. Lady Shu had been sentenced to death by Grand concubine Yi herself. Han Yunshi couldn't even visit her, but she knew that the paranoid Grand concubine Yi would definitely pay a visit to the justice courts after her words today. She only hoped that Grand concubine Yi wouldn't be too late. She was already late, but had been delayed by Grand concubine Yi's side. By the time she reached the hibiscus courtyard, it was already late at night. The palace was pitch black, which meant that its master hadn't returned yet. It's already so late. Do you still want to keep me company? Then tonight, will you come back? Han Yunshi glanced at the palace from a distance before turning with her head bowed. Step by step, she walked towards the leisurely cloud pavilion. Zhao Mama saw her complexion and asked with concern, "Esteemed Wang Fei, what's wrong? Are you unwell? Did you catch a cold?" Han Yunshi finally raised her head, wanting to ask about Tianshan Ken's. That was because Long Fei Yi and Duanmu Yarrow shared the same master. Last time she'd asked, but she didn't get to the bottom of it. But on second thought, she decided to forget it. What was the point of asking so much? What did it have to do with her whether or not he was taking another official wife, left or right? She didn't even like him. Staying at the Duke of Qin's estate was her fate. It was a place to settle down and get a foothold in Tianning's capital city. If anyone dared to cut off her path to survival, she'd never let them off. Thinking up to here, Han Yunshi exhaled and patted Zhao Mama on the shoulder. Then she went upstairs, closed the door, and went to sleep. Zhao Mama's face was filled with bewilderment. What's wrong with her mistress today? Has she been possessed? That night, the exhausted Han Yunshi fell asleep unknowingly. Meanwhile, Long Fei Yi and Emperor Tianhui were locked up in the imperial study to discuss the spy case until daybreak. Long Fei Yi had always been in charge of the Tianli spy case. He had absolute authority over the case, and even Emperor Tianhui couldn't interfere with how he dealt with the culprits. Even though Madame Li came from the Han family and had been hiding there for years, a single word from Long Fei could turn the Han family into criminals. Even Emperor Tianhui wouldn't pursue the matter. But things were different now. Madame Li's last words had made Emperor Tianhui impatient to get rid of the rest of the Han family to prevent future troubles. He even wanted to hold Han Yunxi accountable. Long Fei had been ordered to accompany Princess Rongla for an entire day before Emperor Tianhui finally relented and gave him a chance to discuss the matter. This was a business transaction, not because Long Fei was powerless. In fact, it proved that Emperor Tianhui was powerless against his little brother, Long Fei. Otherwise, who would dare disobey an imperial order? Who would have the right to bargain? Seeing Long Fei's icy expression, Emperor Tianhui's fists clenched tightly in his sleeves. He'd always wanted to get rid of the Duke of Qin, but Tianning couldn't do without him. The valiant and powerful Northern Li Empire was like a pack of wolves and tigers. If not for the Duke of Qin's presence, they would have moved against Tianning long ago. He hated a man like this to the bone, but he had no choice but to rely on him. Emperor Tianhui truly felt sullen. The Han family's matters have been settled. If Imperial Brother has nothing else to do, it's time for morning court, Long Fei said mildly. It was enough for an entire night of verbal sparring. Emperor Tianhui didn't reply directly, but simply said, Crown Prince Yi and Princess Rongla will only return after the new year. You can reconsider the marriage alliance. The marriage alliance is a matter between two countries. Imperial Brother should consult with Western Jews Emperor more. It's inconvenient for Chundi to interfere. After the new year, Chundi has plans to travel and have no time to share Imperial Brother's burdens. Long Fei refused outright. In the end, Emperor Tianhui narrowed his eyes and said coldly, The Duke of Qin has worked hard over the matter of the spy. It's time for you to rest. Why don't you hand over the matter of the spy case to someone else so you can recuperate? Was he planning to take back his power? Long Fei's icy lips curved into a mocking smile as he said, Chundi hasn't even reported, but Imperial Brother already knows that there's a follow-up to the spy case. Imperial Brother is wise and brilliant. Emperor Tianhui grew alarmed at his words. Duke of Qin, what do you mean? Madame Li isn't the true mastermind behind the scenes. There's still another person behind her. Chundi's preliminary investigations show that it should be someone from Northern Li's imperial clan. As for who that person is and whether they'll offend our Tianning, that's still unknown, Long Fei replied truthfully. Emperor Tianhui never thought that Madame Li still had someone behind her back. If they hadn't found out who that person was, then it meant that Tianning's capital city was in danger. It was impossible to guard against a spy in the first place, much less the fact that it involved poisons. Madame Li's ambush was deep and her poison skills were formidable. Emperor Tianhui had seen it all with his own eyes. Wouldn't the person behind her be even more dangerous? Poisons were an unorthodox art. Among all of Tianning's civil and military officials, who besides Long Fei dared to take on such a hot potato? Who else was qualified to do so? Emperor Tianhui's eyes narrowed into slits as he coldly examined his young and promising younger brother. Long Fei allowed him to look as he pleased, his expression cold and his eyes cold. His entire being exuded a natural air of nobility. Although he was in a side seat, he was even more lofty and inviolable than Emperor Tianhui. Finally, Emperor Tianhui stood up and said, Continue the investigation. So speaking, he ordered eunuch Shui, change your clothes and attend court. Satisfied, Long Fei rose to his feet. Chundi obeys. I'll take my leave. Although Emperor Tianhui hadn't said a word, he'd compromised. Besides the Duke of Qin, no one else would be able to punish the Han family for their crimes. Chapter 147. Today was the 4th day since Madame Li's death. Although she didn't know the fate of the Han family, Han Yunxi still spent quite a bit of time and effort to make sure everything was handled properly. Long Fei hadn't returned last night, and she hadn't seen him all day. Han Yunshi didn't ask for his whereabouts, but waited in silence. As long as nothing happened to the Han family, she could follow him wherever he went. After eating dinner at the Han estate, Han Yunshi returned and discovered that the lights in Long Fei Yi's quarters had lit up. This meant that Long Fei Yi had returned. This was what he'd promised to do in the first place, so he should be the one to give her an explanation instead of her asking him again and again. After pausing for a while, Han Yunshi strode towards Leisurely Cloud Pavilion. She picked up a medical book and sat in a rocking chair in the courtyard to read it. Zhao Mama brought over some tea and said in a low voice, "Esteemed Wang Fei, His Highness has returned." Millimeter, Han Yunshi replied mildly without any other reaction. Zhao Mama grew more and more suspicious. Over the past 2 days, her mistress had been in low spirits. She wondered if it had anything to do with her master, but now it seemed that she didn't care much about him at all. Currently, Long Fei Yi was in the courtyard outside his quarters, sitting in a rocking chair as well. He was reading a few secret reports that had just arrived. He was very busy, but not just dealing with the Northern Li spies. The entire hibiscus courtyard was extremely quiet. Soon enough, a thin layer of snow began to drift through the air. He didn't mind, but allowed the snowflakes to fall on his hair and body. Soon enough, Chu Shifeng arrived. "Master, the Celestial Fragrance Tea Shop has been sealed and the deeds handed in. But Ji Yu didn't show up, so he left it all to guard Shangguan to handle," Chu Shifeng reported. Originally, after His Highness and esteemed Wang Fei came back, they were busy with the matter of testing the 10,000 snake poison and didn't mention the Celestial Fragrance Tea House again. However, he didn't know what happened last night. Before His Highness entered the palace, he actually specifically ordered him to immediately seal the Celestial Fragrance Tea House. Long Fei Yi's face was expressionless as he finished reading one of the secret reports. Then he said, "Clearly investigate all of Gu's properties in the capital and seal them up on suspicion of collusion with the enemy." Could it be that Ji Yu had touched His Highness's reverse scale? But what was His Highness's reverse scale? Chu Shifeng had served her for years, but he still didn't know. Chu Shifeng didn't dare to ask, but only nodded. This subordinate understands. As she prepared to leave, Long Fei spoke up again. "While you're at it, check if Ji Yu Beiyue's been idle lately." Chu Shifeng grew even more puzzled. What's the point of investigating Imperial Physician Ji Yu? Could it be that there was a new development in the case of the traitor, and it involved Imperial Physician Ji Yu? But that didn't seem very likely. "Your Highness, please say that Imperial Physician Ji Yu stayed in the palace for a while before falling seriously ill. As this subordinate sees it, he's probably recuperating," Chu Shifeng replied seriously. But Long Fei Yi only tossed him 3 words. "Investigate clearly." "Yes." Chu Shifeng felt resentful. Judging from His Highness's attitude, he knew that His Highness wouldn't tell him even if he dared to ask. The snow grew heavier and heavier. Long Fei Yi rose to his feet and brushed the snow from his hair and clothes. He held up an oil paper umbrella and headed towards Leisurely Cloud Pavilion. He was a naturally reserved man, so his figure seemed lonely and desolate in the silent, snowy night. He hadn't gone far when he stopped, only to see Han Yunshi walking towards him. She was dressed in thin robes without a cloak, allowing the snow to pile on her shoulders. Was she here to look for him? She saw his figure from a distance and stopped in her tracks. Was he planning to go to Leisurely Cloud Pavilion to find her? Very soon, he entered the corridor and looked at her coldly. When he saw that she still hadn't moved, he finally spoke up. His voice was very loud and filled with anger. "Still not coming over?" She didn't answer, but kept her eyes downcast. Instead, she ran over in fright, her body covered in snow in a sorry state. He looked at her coldly and saw that her lips had turned white from the cold. Her face was purple and green. He took off his fox fur cloak and handed it to her, commanding, "Put it on." "Many thanks, Your Highness. Chunxie will be going back soon, there's no need," she refused politely. His eyes turned cold as he tossed her the cloak. She had no choice but to catch it, but that was all. However, she had to admit that even though she was just catching it, her cold hands were instantly warmed up. This luxurious fox fur cloak was filled with his body temperature. She really had come to find him. She tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep, so she simply wanted to ask him if the Han family was alive or dead. However, when she saw him, she didn't know why, but she didn't want to talk. And he really had come to find her to talk about the Han family. He never made promises easily, especially to women. Since he had made a promise, no matter what price he had to pay or how many exceptions he made, he would fulfill it. Madam Lee's case will be closed tomorrow. The Supreme Court will issue a notice that it won't implicate Han Yuni or anyone from the Han family. He was very straightforward. He had only promised to protect Han Yuni before, but now, he was protecting the entire Han family. Hearing this, Han Yunshi, who had been in a low state, suddenly raised her head and met Long Fei Yi's cold and deep eyes. She was very surprised and blurted out, "Really? This prince keeps his word." Protecting the Han family is a reward for your meritorious service in testing the poison, Long Fei Yi explained. Han Yunshi was overjoyed. Madame Shu and Madame Li were no longer related to the Han family. Protecting the Han family was equivalent to protecting little Yi Er's family. She immediately bowed. "On behalf of the entire Han family, this concubine thanks your highness for your grace. Is there anything else?" Long Fei Yi asked. Anything else? Was there anything else? What did he want her to ask? If she asked, would he answer? Han Yunshi thought for a moment, stood up, and smiled. "That's all. I won't disturb your highness any longer." Saying so, she resolutely turned to leave. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi coldly said, "Stop." Han Yunshi abruptly stopped, her heart skipping a beat. What did he want to do by telling her to stop? Ask what? Was there anything else other than the incident at Ming Xiong Inn? Was he going to warn her again with those behave and decorum words? She hadn't even questioned him about Duan Mu Yao. If the title of husband and wife was a kind of restriction, then it shouldn't only restrict her, right? The more she thought about it, the harder she bit her lip. Unexpectedly, Long Fei Yi didn't do anything. He didn't ask anything. He held up the oil paper umbrella at the side and passed it to Han Yunshi from behind. His voice was cold. "Take it away." He was very tall and held the oil paper umbrella high. She looked up and saw his hand holding the umbrella. His hand was very big and covered the entire handle. He didn't ask about the incident at the tea house just like that. Han Yunshi stared blankly for a while before saying, "There's no need, this concubine," but before she could finish speaking, he suddenly closed in on her from behind, domineering and forceful. For a moment, she only felt his breath behind her, as if she had been drawn into a strong sphere of strength and couldn't break free. "Take it away," he said sternly. Han Yunshi pursed her lips. "Take it away then." She put on the fox fur cloak in her hand and reached out to grab the oil paper umbrella. Long Fei Yi didn't seem to expect her to do this and didn't immediately let go. Han Yunshi tugged again before he finally let go. Thus, Han Yunshi put on his fox fur cloak and held up his black oil paper umbrella as she strode away. Long Fei Yi's handsome brows slowly knitted together. Even after Han Yunshi's back disappeared into the wind and snow, and even after the lights in the distant leisurely cloud loft were lit, he still stood in the same spot. She didn't know how long he had been standing there, but his eyes were dark and gloomy, uncertain. When Han Yunshi returned to the loft, she even brought the umbrella upstairs. She threw it aside harshly. She had already taken off the fox fur cloak and threw it beside the oil paper umbrella. She glared fiercely and suddenly rushed up, raising her foot to step on it. But for some reason, she didn't step on it. Damn it! She cursed and lay down heavily on the bed. She hated this feeling too much. Her heart hurt so much that she wanted to die, but she didn't know what to feel. She wanted to explode, but she didn't know what to explode with. Didn't that guy keep his promise to protect little Yi Er? He even protected the Han family, so why didn't she feel happy at all? Han Yunshi pulled the blanket over her head, refusing to think about it. She told herself that the matter of the Northern Li spy had come to an end. There was nothing between them anymore. He would continue on his path, and she would continue on her single plank bridge. Well water wouldn't interfere with river water. It was another sleepless night. The next day, Han Yunshi woke up early. On the way to the Han family, she saw the notice from the Supreme Court. Madam Li, as the main culprit, had died, and Han Ruoxue, as an accomplice, was sentenced to life imprisonment even though she didn't know the truth. As a result, the case of Madam Li and her daughter became a normal case. There was no traitor involved, and the Han family was justified in not being implicated. As for how long Fei Yi would deal with the aftermath, and whether he would continue to investigate the masked man, those were still secrets. Han Yunshi told herself not to get involved with him anymore. When Han Yunshi arrived at the Han family, she finally felt at ease and handed the Han medical cannon to little Yi Er. This was the Han family's property, so it should belong to the Han family's descendant. Little Yi Er was a very talented child. Han Yunshi believed that as long as he was given a good environment, one day, he would make the Han family stand up again in the medical world. In the past, Madame Shu had always been in charge of the Han family. Now that Madame Shu was gone, Madame Li was gone, and the other concubines had fled, the burden fell on 7th Madame's shoulders. With Han Yunshi's support, the covetous people in the Han family didn't dare to make things difficult for her. Instead, they curried favor with 7th Madame and brought many expensive gifts to visit. After a few days, 7th Madame recovered. Han Yunshi called the accountant and housekeeper to discuss. Although the Han family's treasury had a lot of money, and 7th Madame and little Yi Er didn't have to worry about food and clothing for the rest of their lives, the Han family's business wasn't very big now. All the medical centers and pharmacies were closed, and their expenses were not much different from before. Therefore, it was necessary to reduce expenses. After a round of discussion, Han Yunshi discovered that 7th Madame might be frail and weak, but she wasn't stupid. She had plenty of original views on managing affairs and managing finances. What she lacked were opportunities and guts. Little Chen Xiong, in the future, you will follow 7th Madame. If 7th Madame doesn't dare to do it, you will support her. Han Yunshi teased. Little Chen Xiong pouted as she looked at her master. It was as if a bottle of mixed feelings had been overturned in her heart. She couldn't tell what she was feeling. She couldn't bear to part with her master, but she also couldn't bear to part with 7th Madame and little Yi Er. After serving them for so many days, she had long developed feelings for them. Seeing that little Chen Xiong didn't speak, little Yi Er secretly tugged at the corner of her clothes. Little Chen Xiong's heart immediately softened. Master, then can I go to the Wangfu to see you? Han Yunshi was happy. Of course. 7th Madame also couldn't bear to leave little Chen Xiong. When she heard this, she immediately wanted to bow and express her gratitude. Han Yunshi hurriedly stopped her. In the future, when I return to my maternal home, we don't have to be so particular. Although this maternal home wasn't powerful, it was comfortable. It was also a backing. Chapter 148. After several days of snow, the sky finally cleared up. It was as if the sky had been washed, a beautiful azure blue. After that bet, Mu Liuyu didn't attend any gatherings in the circle. She spent her days hiding in her room, depressed, and her temper grew worse and worse. With a bang, another expensive vase was smashed. The servant girls surrounded the door, but no one dared to enter. At first, General Mu and Mu Qingwu would still come over to take a look, but now they were numb to it. They were more worried that this lass's reputation was so bad that marrying into a good family in the future would be a big problem. Someone come! Someone come! Mu Liuyu shouted angrily. A servant girl timidly ran over, not daring to get too close. Did Princess Changping come? Did I not know if she came? Mu Liuyu questioned. Her only hope was Princess Changping. However, ever since the incident, Princess Changping hadn't come even once. The plum blossom meet was just around the corner, yet she still hadn't received an invitation. Was she being completely abandoned? No. The servant girl replied cautiously. She immediately comforted her. Miss, maybe the princess is busy. She'll come over in a few days. Busy with what? The plum blossom meet. Who did she invite? Did she invite Han Yunxi? Mu Liuyu asked anxiously. She had long heard that this year's Plum Blossom Meet was hosted by Princess Changping. She had the final say on who to invite. How could the servant girl know so much? She immediately found an excuse and fled. Miss, please wait a moment. This servant girl will go ask around. With Mu Liuyu's reputation being so bad, Princess Changping naturally wouldn't come. She was indeed busy with the Plum Blossom Meet. The first invitation was sent to the Duke of Qin's estate, and it was for Han Yunxi. These past few days, Han Yunxi had been shuttling back and forth between the Han estate and the Duke of Qin's estate, dealing with the aftermath of the Han estate. After that night, she hadn't seen Long Feiyi again. She had long locked the windows of the attic, so she had no idea if that fellow had returned at night. She also had no idea if he was busy or not. As for news of the Western Jew princess, she didn't try to find out. Her days went on like this. Occasionally, she'd visit Grand Concubine Yi to help her expel poison and nourish her beauty and chat a bit. Although their relationship wasn't very close, it was much better than before. During this period, Ji Yu had sent a few cans of premium Nanshan black tea leaves, but she threw them all away. No one knew that she didn't go to Nanshan to pick the black tea leaves for herself. At this time, she had just returned when Steward Xia came looking for her. Esteemed Wang Fei, esteemed Imperial Concubine Dowager wants you to go over. What is it? Han Yunxi didn't understand. She just performed acupuncture on Grand Concubine Yi this morning. Besides that, Grand Concubine Yi would never seek her out. This subordinate doesn't know. Consort Dowager is waiting. Esteemed Wang Fei should hurry over, Steward Xia replied. Could it be that something had happened to Madame Xu? Grand Concubine Yi had ignored her multiple indirect inquiries. She couldn't get any news from the justice courts, so she could only try to figure things out. Han Yunxi hurried over. But as soon as she entered, she saw an unexpected person. Murong Wanru. What was going on? This white lotus had actually appeared. Did Grand Concubine Yi never suspect Murong Wanru, or was she covering for her despite knowing the truth? She was just an adopted daughter, so was it worth it? Sister-in-law, you're finally here. It's cold outside, so hurry and have a cup of hot tea. Murong Wanru acted as if nothing had happened. She was especially attentive and warm as she pulled Han Yunxi to sit and poured tea. Han Yunxi politely declined and asked, Mu Fei, Steward Xia said you were in a hurry to find me. Grand Concubine Yi knitted her brows as she handed over a pink invitation card. It was double-layered with flowers and carved with a thin, delicate plum blossom. Han Yunxi took a look and immediately understood what was going on. This was an invitation to the Plum Blossom Meet. Unlike the other invitees, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There was no good banquet, no good table. She was the least interested in such things. The so-called Plum Blossom Meet only invited the rich and noble. Moreover, most of the guests were young women. Although it was said to admire the plum blossoms, it was actually a group of women vying for attention, forming cliques, and trampling on each other. Every time something happened at the Plum Blossom Meet, it would spread and become the talk of the noble ladies. How boring. Han Yunxi hesitated before saying, Mu Fei, Chunqia's body isn't well. I don't know if this banquet can, but before she could finish, Murong Wanru spoke up. Sister-in-law, you mustn't not go. The Empress's body isn't well, so Princess Changping is hosting this time. If you don't go, what will she think? Han Yunxi was startled. She didn't expect things to turn out like this. If that was the case, then this banquet wouldn't be a good one. Han Yunxi still remembered the scene at the general's estate last time. Mu Qingwu had run off on the streets, so Changping probably held a grudge against her. Heaven knows what kind of trap she'd prepared for her this time. Mu Fei, Chunqia is a coarse person without any talent or learning. Coincidentally, my body isn't well, so I'm afraid I'll lose face for you if I go. Han Yunxi refused again. It was too easy for her to refuse Princess Changping. She could just refuse without giving her face, but the effects of this matter weren't small. She had to get past Grand Concubine Yi first. Grand Concubine Yi still didn't speak, So Murong Wanru spoke up again. Sister-in-law is too modest. It's just admiring the plum blossoms. What talent or learning is needed? If sister-in-law doesn't go, won't Wanru be left alone? Moreover, sister-in-law is going as a representative of our Duke of Qin's estate. If you don't go, then Wanru might as well not go. Now Han Yunshi understood why Murong Wanru's ban had been lifted without any warning. As it turned out, she'd been invited as well. She opened up the invitation and saw that it was dated 3 days later. Han Yunshi knitted her brows and didn't speak. Finally, the silent grand concubine Yi spoke up. Yunshi, if you don't go, I'll lose even more face. A few days ago, they were already discussing whether or not Changping would invite you. Do you dare to go? Yunshi. Heavens. With a thump, the teacup in Murong Wanru's hands fell to the ground. She was frightened. Mu Fei was calling Han Yunshi by her name so intimately and even discussing things with her so nicely. Murong Wanru's face was ghastly white. She'd been caught unprepared. She thought Mu Fei would angrily reprimand Han Yunshi, but who knew Mu Fei's attitude was like this? What had happened between Mu Fei and Han Yunshi while she was locked up in the palace? She'd just been released and hadn't had time to ask her confidant about the situation. Seeing this, Grand Concubine Yi looked over unhappily. What's the matter with you? Han Yunshi was secretly laughing in her heart. It didn't matter that Murong Wanru was released. She'd be crying in the days to come. Mu Fei, Chunxie heard that as long as an unmarried woman wins a prize at the plum blossom meet and becomes famous, matchmakers will trample all over their doorsteps afterwards. I don't know if it's really that exaggerated. Han Yunshi asked seriously. Grand Concubine Yi smiled. It's exaggerated, it's exaggerated. Still, it can't be considered fake. As long as one dazzled the crowd at the plum blossom meet, they'd attract the admiration of countless gentlemen who'd want to marry them. Thus, the plum blossom meet was a sacred gathering that women in the capital yearned for even in their dreams. So it's like that. Then I'll go with Wanru. That girl's reached marriageable age, Han Yunshi said with a smile. Murong Wanru's heart skipped a beat at these words. Han Yunshi, that slut, really wanted to marry her off. It wasn't up to her to care about her marriage. Wanru, you have to perform well. Mu Fei, you should have steward Xia thicken our doorsteps later, hehe, Han Yunshi teased. A complicated look flitted past Grand Concubine Yi's eyes, but she didn't speak. Han Yunshi added, Mu Fei, or have you already chosen a family for Wanru? Grand Concubine Yi immediately shook her head. There's nothing like that. Don't start rumors. Mu Fei, Wanru's not young anymore. If she's not anxious, aren't you anxious for her sake as well? Han Yunshi asked next. Murong Wanru felt like her lungs were about to explode. Neither she nor Mu Fei were anxious, so why was this slut so anxious? What did it have to do with her? But Grand Concubine Yi only replied mildly, of course I'm anxious. But such things can't be rushed. You have to think things over slowly, right? Murong Wanru's heart almost stopped at these words. How could Mu Fei say such things? She was an adopted daughter, not the Duke of Qin's blood sister. Mu Fei had even tried to match her with the Duke of Qin time and time again. Mu Fei said that as long as the Duke of Qin nodded, she'd immediately make her his concubine. That way, she could stay by her side for the rest of her life. Could it be that Mu Fei had changed her mind? She'd worked hard for so many years just to stay by the Duke of Qin's side. Even if she couldn't be official consort because of her birth, she didn't mind. Mu Fei understood her heart best, so how could she be like this? Indeed, we should think things over slowly. If Mu Fei has any candidates in mind, don't hide them in secret. Chunxie can help consider them as well, Han Yunshi said seriously. Grand Concubine Yi nodded without a word, but the mere movement was enough to break Murong Wanru's heart. She grabbed Grand Concubine Yi's hand in agitation and grew anxious. Mu Fei, daughter won't marry. Won't marry. Daughter wants to stay at home and serve you for the rest of my life. These words were clearly hinting at Grand Concubine Yi. Even if she married the Duke of Qin, she'd stay at the Duke of Qin's estate and serve her for the rest of her life. But before Grand Concubine Yi could speak, Han Yunshi spoke up. What a silly girl. How could Mu Fei keep you for the rest of your life? You're harming yourself and Mu Fei. You're not young anymore. If you don't marry now, what will people outside say about you and Mu Fei? Murong Wanru gave Han Yunshi a resentful look before sobbing. Sister-in-law, could it be that you dislike Wanru? You want to chase Wanru away? This is Mu Fei's home. What are you saying? Sister-in-law is doing this for your own good. Han Yunshi explained seriously. How could she not feel Murong Wanru's good feelings towards the Duke of Qin? Mu Fei, Murong Wanru wanted to continue, but Grand Concubine Yi waved a hand to cut her off. All right. Let's talk about the plum blossom meat first. She looked at Han Yunshi from head to toe and said, Yunshi, prepare 3 sets of presentable robes. 1 for the day and 2 for spare. Use these 3 days to understand the situation at the plum blossom meet with Wanru. Remember, you're Qin Wangfei and Changping's elder. Don't lose face for me. Han Yunshi looked at Grand Concubine Yi seriously. She knew she couldn't avoid this calamity. It was rare that Grand Concubine Yi didn't warn her, but reminded her like this. All right, this time she'd go just because of Grand Concubine Yi's attitude. Forget about the plum blossom meet, she wasn't afraid even if it was a banquet at Hongmen. Yes, Chen Xie understands, Han Yunshi replied seriously. Murong Wanru's heart was filled with terror. Chapter 149. 3 days later, the plum blossom meet was held as scheduled. The imperial plum blossom garden on the outskirts of the city was filled with the fragrance of flowers. Plum blossoms were in full bloom, reflecting the snow. From a distance, it looked like a dreamy sea of flowers. This year's plum blossoms had bloomed especially early and luxuriantly. Beneath the sea of plum blossoms, a banquet had long been set up. Princess Changping and Crown Prince Long Tianmo sat on the left and right of the main seats. The first seat to the Crown Prince's left was Western Ju's Princess Rongla, Duanmu Yao. Although there were quite a few distinguished scholars attending this banquet, most of them were women. Long Tianmo hadn't wanted to come, but he'd received Imperial Father's orders last night to accompany the princess. A few days ago, someone had spread a rumor that Imperial Uncle Qin had been accompanying Princess Rongla the entire time. It looked like the rumors were false. Imperial families were the most heartless. Every woman in the imperial family, regardless of whether they were wives or concubines, was a tool. When they were useful, they'd be fought over until their heads bled. When they weren't useful, they'd be cast aside like a pair of worn-out shoes, to say nothing of a crown prince's woman. If Duanmu Yarrow wanted to marry him, he wouldn't even blink an eye. Unfortunately, everyone knew that Duanmu Yarrow's heart was with the Duke of Qin. Although Western Ju and Tianning were allied by marriage, they each had their own plans. Imperial Father desperately hoped that Princess Rongla could marry him as soon as possible so that the two countries could cooperate further. Especially when it came to the defense of the northeast border, they could reach a consensus as soon as possible to resist the Qianli dynasty. Unfortunately, Western Ju's emperor had already said that Princess Rongla had to find her ideal husband before marrying him. Who else but Imperial Uncle Qin could be her ideal husband? However, Duanmu Yarrow still hadn't made a public statement about this secret. No one dared to guess Imperial Uncle Qin's stance on this matter, so the matter was delayed. Yao, try this plum blossom tea. Can you only drink it in Tianning? Long Tianmo found a topic to talk about and called her Yarrow to close the distance between them. But Duanmu Yarrow didn't give him any face at all. Instead, she called him Your Highness Crown Prince and maintained her distance. Your Highness Crown Prince, is it more appropriate to call me Rongla? Long Tianmo's eyes flashed with anger, but he hid it very well. This woman was very beautiful, and she was indeed good at both civil and martial arts. However, from the bottom of his heart, he really looked down on this woman. If not for the fact that she was the legitimate princess of Western Ju, he would not even look at her. Although he was angry, Long Tianmo's tone was still gentle. I heard that Uncle Qin will travel after the new year. Does Princess Rongla know where he will go? Duanmu Yarrow turned to look at him, shock written all over her face. She hadn't gone back with her imperial brother, but had stayed in Tianning to celebrate the new year. She was hoping to find a way to settle the marriage after the new year, but she never expected her senior brother to be heading out. Emperor Tianhui had promised her in secret that she'd find her Mr. Right, but did those words still count? Long Tianmo was very satisfied with Duanmu Yarrow's reaction. Princess Rongla doesn't seem to know about this yet. It seems like I'll have to wait for Imperial Aunt Qin to come before asking her. As he spoke, he picked up the teacup and took a sip. But Duanmu Yarrow's face had completely changed. Han Yunshi. How could Han Yunshi know senior brother's whereabouts? How was that possible? By now, most of the invitees had already arrived and were chatting in twos and threes. Of course, the hottest topic was Han Yunshi. Would Han Yunshi come? The Plum Blossom Meet wasn't just a place to test one's interpersonal relationships, but their talents as well. Han Yunshi's interpersonal relationships aside, she didn't even have a single close friend in the circle. As for her talents, that was the highlight of the day. Han Yunshi was a commoner's daughter. How could a medical family compare to the imperial clan and nobles? Moreover, she hadn't been favored since childhood and hadn't received any training. What talents could she have? What gave her the confidence to participate in the Plum Blossom Meet? The Plum Blossom Meet wasn't just for eating, chatting, and admiring the flowers. Apparently, many people in and out of the palace were betting on whether Han Yunshi would dare to show up today. But amidst the whispers, a eunuch announced in a loud voice, "Qin Wangfei has arrived. Miss Wanru has arrived. She's here?" She really dared to show up. In an instant, everyone looked towards the source of the voice and saw Han Yunshi dressed in an elegant and refined snow-white dress. Her entire body was snow-white, with only a plum blossom jade belt around her waist. White dress and red jade. This was such a simple combination, but it made people's eyes light up. She instantly defeated all the luxuriously dressed women present. Of course, Murong Wanru, who was walking beside her, also looked dull. Due to Han Yunshi's status, even if everyone was unwilling, they still stood up to welcome her. However, Duanmu Yarrow was sitting calmly and stood out among the standing crowd. Han Yunshi walked closer before lazily standing up. She didn't even greet her. Long time no see. She hated being called esteemed Wangfei, and hated being called Qin Wangfei even more. Han Yunshi didn't get angry, but smiled innocently. Princess Rongla must have been here for a few days. I thought your senior brother would bring you home for tea, but you never showed up. Then she assumed the posture of a hostess. How about you come back with me after this banquet ends and drink tea in my courtyard? She didn't care whether Duanmu Yarrow would really marry into the Duke of Qin's estate. She didn't care about Long Fei Yi's attitude. In any case, she'd steeled her heart. No matter who wanted to bully her or give her a hard time, there was no way. Duanmu Yarrow's hands clenched into fists in her sleeves at these words. Without a doubt, Han Yunshi's words had hit her sore spot. She knew best what kind of position she held in the Duke of Qin's heart. That day, she'd only accompanied him because Emperor Tianhui had forced her. That day, her senior brother hadn't even said more than 5 sentences to her. All right, I'll definitely find senior brother to play with another day. Duanmu Yarrow held back her temper as she replied. Han Yunshi, don't be so pleased with yourself too early. You'll see what happens later. Han Yunshi sat down between Duanmu Yarrow and Long Tianmo. As for Murong Wanru, she didn't receive such high treatment and could only sit below. Princess Changping didn't speak the entire time, but she kept shooting glances at Han Yunshi while laughing coldly in her heart. Today's banquet was all for Han Yunshi's sake. Han Yunshi would definitely be the main character, but she'd be the one to make a fool of herself. Compared to Princess Changping, Crown Prince Long Tianmo was much more polite. As soon as Han Yunshi sat down, he spoke. Imperial Qin Aunt, I heard Imperial Qin Uncle will be leaving after the new year. His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough for Duanmu Yarrow to hear. Without a doubt, he was doing it on purpose. Even if he didn't like her, he still wanted to win over Duanmu Yarrow. But to do that, he'd have to make her give up on the Duke of Qin. Han Yunxi never expected Long Tianmo to suddenly ask her about Long Fei Yi. Moreover, she'd never heard of such a thing. All right, she knew less about him than anyone else. She was about to answer truthfully when she saw Duanmu Yarrow shoot her a hostile look. Han Yunxi admitted that she was very bad. Without thinking, she said, "Who did you hear that from?" "The Duke of Qin has only told me about this." Long Tianmo smiled. "Naturally, I heard it from Imperial Father. Emperor Tianhui." Duanmu Yarrow narrowed her eyes. Emperor Tianhui clearly knew Long Fei Yi was leaving, but why didn't he tell her? Abominable. Imperial Qin aunt, where is Imperial uncle planning to go? How long will he be gone for? Long Tianmo asked next. You can ask your Imperial father, Han Yunxi replied offhandedly. Imperial father isn't sure either. That's why he had me ask you. Long Tianmo lowered his voice. Han Yunxi smiled mysteriously. It's a secret. Duanmu Yarrow didn't know why Long Mo was asking these questions, but when she saw Duanmu Yarrow's dark expression, she felt especially pleased. She discovered that Duanmu Yarrow and Long Fei Yi weren't close at all. At the very least, Duanmu Yarrow was the same as her, unaware that Long Fei Yi was leaving after the new year. Thinking up to here, Han Yunxi's mood improved without her noticing. While they were chatting, a eunuch's loud announcement drew everyone's attention once again. Marquis Pingbei's estate, Gongzi Che has arrived. Marquis Pingnan's estate, Gongzi Mu has arrived. Marquis Pingbei and Marquis Pingnan were known as the North and South Lords. Although they were well known, they didn't have a good reputation. Marquis Pingbei's only son, Zhongsun Che, was also known as the North Lord. He was dressed in white robes and held a folding fan in his hand, looking extraordinary and distinguished. He was not only famous for his scholarly talents, but also for his dissolute nature. He'd just turned 18 this year, but already had 10 concubines. There were rumors that he'd even touched his father's concubines. He was simply a beast in human form. Marquis Pingnan's only son, Li Muge, was known as Nan Gongzi. He was dressed in purple and similarly held a folding fan in his hand. At first glance, he looked clean and pure, like a banished immortal. However, upon closer inspection, one would see that his hand was holding a lotus flower and his feet were taking small quick steps. He was more feminine than a woman. His homosexual tendencies had long been an open secret. The appearance of the North and South Lords caused quite a stir. Dissolute and distinguished men were women's poison, while feminine men were women's best friends. These two gentlemen's popularity had always been at its peak. This time, Princess Changping was hosting the banquet and had invited quite a few men. However, Princess Changping had never interacted with them. Why did she invite them this time? Not minding the crowd's timid discussions, Princess Changping playfully glanced at Murong Wanru. Murong Wanru returned a meaningful look. The two had a tacit understanding, as if they were hiding some secret. Han Yunxi was also puzzled. She sized up the North and South Lords and felt that something wasn't right, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Very quickly, everyone had arrived and the banquet began. This year's plum blossom meet had the theme of plum blossom tea and pastries. All kinds of unique pastries and tea were served. Unfortunately, none of them were in the mood to taste it. Looking at Han Yunxi sitting high above, they were filled with envy, jealousy, and hatred. They were also eager to give it a try. They couldn't wait to see Han Yunxi make a fool of herself. A commoner girl with a lower birth than them was simply an insult to the 3 words Qin Wangfei. She actually dared to sit so calmly and leisurely. Today's opportunity had come. They wanted to beat this woman back to her original form. They wanted to break her laughable pride and blind arrogance. They wanted to let her know that even if she really thought of herself as a scallion, no one would eat her as dipping sauce. As a matter of fact, Princess Changping hadn't even spoken yet, but there was already someone who couldn't restrain herself. This person was none other than the youngest daughter of the Minister of Personnel, Madame Shu's younger sister, Shu Yunrong. She stood up and respectfully said, "Your Highness, the plum blossoms are in full bloom this year. Why don't we sing the plum blossoms?" Sing the plum blossoms, Princess Changping had been waiting for someone to speak. She was overjoyed and excitedly stood up. Miss Xu is so refined. This is a good idea. Chapter 151. Long Tianmo stared at Han Yunxi in disbelief. This was the second time he'd seen her up close. The first time was when she'd cured his strange illness and saved his life. The feeling this time was completely different. No matter how much he tried to ignore it, he couldn't fool himself. He liked this woman. Moreover, he knew that she was different from Duanmu Yarrow. Duanmu Yarrow could help him secure his position as crown prince and the throne in the future, but Han Yunxi could bring his life to a whole new level. However, he constantly reminded himself of one fact. The man behind this woman could also help him ascend to the throne, but he could also easily destroy everything he had now. He couldn't afford to offend him. How could an ant shake a tree? How could a lone star compete with the brilliant moon? He could only secretly hope that the Duke of Qin hadn't discovered this woman's difference. Perhaps the proud and aloof Duke of Qin would miss this woman. Perhaps, one day in the future, there would still be hope for him. Long Tianmo's applause brought the stunned crowd back to their senses. Quite a few people joined in. Wonderful. Ambitious and magnanimous. This poem will definitely become a classic. Esteemed Wang Fei is truly unfathomable. His Highness Duke of Qin has good taste. Heh. As expected of Qin Wang Fei, this humble one is convinced. I'm sincerely convinced. Without a certain level of magnanimity, it's impossible to write such a poem. Esteemed Wang Fei, we really don't need to continue. Many of those who had been waiting to see Han Yunxi make a fool of herself were openly praising Han Yunxi. They were willing to admit their inferiority. When one reached a certain height, many people would be jealous. But when one reached true heights, those who envied one would only look up to one. Han Yunxi didn't like plagiarizing, but if this method could shut these people's mouths and let these self-righteous women know that there was always someone better than them, then she was very willing to be a Lei Feng for once. Now, it was time for her to take revenge. She looked at Duanmu Yarrow and smiled faintly. Princess Rongla, it's your turn. Only then did Duanmu Yarrow recover from her shock. Her heart skipped a beat and her body trembled. It was time for her to perform. However, if she didn't do anything better, then she would just be a foil and a disgrace. Moreover, Han Yunxi had just said that she was afraid that if her poem was too good, she would be too embarrassed to compose another one. Now, if she really did it, it wouldn't be as good as her in comparison. Wouldn't it really be like what she said, and she would lose even more face? What should she do? Originally, she had wanted to embarrass Han Yunxi, but now she was being watched by everyone. She was stuck between a rock and a hard place. As time passed, the crowd grew quieter and quieter. Duanmu Yarrow's face gradually turned red. She wanted nothing more than to find a hole to crawl into. Everyone was waiting. Those who'd stood up earlier, those who'd been called out by Princess Changping, were all rejoicing that they hadn't gone up. Otherwise, the ones who'd be embarrassed right now would be themselves. Han Yunxi, this woman, was too frightening. She hid her strength too deeply. It looked like they'd better avoid direct conflict with her in the future. Otherwise, they wouldn't even know how they died. It had to be said that at this moment, even Princess Changping was rejoicing. Luckily, the one who'd made the bet with Han Yunxi was Duanmu Yarrow. If it had been her, then the biggest joke today would have been her. Han Yunxi's patience was limited. She smiled and kindly reminded, Princess Rongla, you've been thinking about it for a long time. You've already published so many poetry books. It's just a poem about plum blossoms. You don't need to think about it for so long, right? Duanmu Yarrow's head snapped up to look at her. Seeing the radiant light in her eyes, she really wanted to kill this woman. She took a few deep breaths and finally admitted defeat. Gritting her teeth, she said, Esteemed Wang Fei is amazing. This princess admits her inferiority. Han Yunshi, this girl, would definitely take revenge. She wasn't modest in the slightest as she laughed. Aya, didn't I remind you long ago? You still insisted on me going first and insisted on making a bet. Now, you'll have to fulfill your end of the bet, right? Duanmu Yarrow was so angry that she could taste blood in her throat. Only the heavens knew how sullen she felt. She lowered her voice and hatefully said, "Of course, I'll accept my loss. From now on, this princess won't write any more poems." Han Yunshi was very satisfied. She smiled innocently and brightly. She turned to look at Princess Changping. "Changping, are we competing in anything else? Painting? Playing the zither? Or playing a game of chess?" How could Princess Changping dare to agree? She hurriedly refused. "It's the same thing every year. How boring. I don't think there's any need." Right now, no one knew how deep Han Yunshi's foundation was. Who would dare to compete with her? Princess Changping really regretted it to death. If she knew things would turn out like this, she wouldn't have bothered with the poetry competition at all. Not only had she failed to defeat Han Yunshi, she'd even stepped on Princess Rongla and stunned everyone. If that poem spread, it would definitely cause a stir in Tianning's capital city. Now that Han Yunshi had defeated Princess Rongla and forced her to give up poetry for the rest of her life, it wouldn't just cause a stir in Tianning's capital city, but all of Cloud Realm continent. After all, Princess Rongla was one of Cloud Realm continent's famed talented women. It was hard not to become famous after defeating her. After all, Princess Rongla's fame resounded throughout Cloud Realm continent not only because of her true talent, but also because she'd spent a lot of time and money on creating public opinion. Han Yunshi, on the other hand, had simply used a poem to pick up a huge bargain. After Princess Changping's refusal, no one else dared to stir up any more trouble. A new round of refreshments was brought in and everyone quietly tasted them. Princess Changping resentfully lowered her head and drank her tea. It was too unexpected. She needed some time to compose herself and re-evaluate Han Yunshi. Meanwhile, Duanmu Yarrow had truly suffered a blow. The more she thought about it, the more sullen she felt. The more she thought about it, the more humiliated she felt. She didn't even dare to raise her head to look at anyone else. Finally, she couldn't sit still any longer and used her body's discomfort as an excuse to leave early. If she wanted to leave, Long Tianmo had no choice but to accompany her. Han Yunshi tasted the pastries with relish as she watched Duanmu Yarrow's retreating form. As she watched, she couldn't help but think of Long Fei Yi. It had been days since she'd seen that fellow. Actually, she assumed that Long Fei Yi would accompany her today as well, but it was Long Tianmo who'd come instead. Rumors had it that there were 3 candidates for the marriage alliance: Long Fei Yi, Long Tianmo, and Mu Qingwu. Judging from Princess Changping's attitude, Mu Qingwu was impossible. She'd only choose between Long Fei Yi and Long Tianmo. Just what was that fellow thinking? She'd said she wouldn't care about his affairs, but Han Yunshi couldn't help but feel conflicted again. It would be New Year's Eve in a few days. Duanmu Yarrow wanted to spend the new year in Tianning, but who was she planning to spend it with on New Year's Eve? Where would she spend it? Would there be news of the marriage alliance after New Year's? Was it true that Long Fei Yi was going to travel after New Year's Eve? Soon enough, plum blossom wine was brought in. Princess Changping finally lifted her head and discovered that Murong Wanru had been giving her meaningful glances the entire time. Princess Changping glanced at the plum blossom wine, a trace of coldness flashing through her eyes. She pulled herself together and nodded towards Murong Wanru, indicating that she shouldn't worry. By the time the plum blossom wine was served, the plum blossom meat was only halfway over. Although Han Yunshi had stolen all the limelight in the first half, there was still the second half. Princess Changping had made ample preparations this time. How could she let Han Yunshi off so easily? The best part was in the second half. Plum blossom wine was a specialty of the plum blossom meat. It was brewed from last year's plum blossoms and snow. Although the wine was fragrant, it was very easy to get drunk. Most people would stop after tasting it. Of course, There were often people who drank excessively and accidentally got drunk. They could only be sent to a distant room to rest for the night before returning by themselves the next day. After tasting a few mouthfuls, Princess Changping spoke up. Every year there's only poetry and songs. The four arts are so boring. We've had enough of admiring the plum blossoms. I think we should try something new. How about it? I presume the princess has a good idea. Murong Wanru, who'd been silent all this time, finally spoke up. The other girls beside her also chimed in. Yes, we should try something new. This year the princess is hosting, so what she says goes. Your Highness, if you have any good ideas, quickly say them. Princess Changping chuckled. This year, Imperial Mother isn't here. How about we play something big? Han Yunxi's heart thumped at these words. She was on guard. However, almost everyone present was delighted and agreed. The atmosphere was lively. Princess Changping stood up. Let's have a drinking competition. Let's have this plum blossom wine. Fresh. Let's have this. Your Highness, this is a good idea. We women don't lose to men. Today, let's have a drinking competition. A drinking competition was much more fun than a poetry competition, especially for many of the women present. This was a rare opportunity to let go of their restraints and reveal their true natures. Everyone was in high spirits. Since the Empress wasn't here, Princess Changping was hosting. In any case, with Princess Changping's support, no one was afraid of anything. Of course, many of the men were in a wait-and-see mode. They didn't plan on participating. After all, a drinking competition with women was somewhat unfair. Watching women compete in drinking was a great joy in life. However, the North and South young masters were eager to give it a try. The joy in their eyes was hard to hide. Gongzi Che lightly fanned himself with a charming smile. Princess Changping, how should we compete? Princess Changping was waiting for these words. She immediately replied, in previous years, you newcomers would have to perform. I think this year, we'll have a drinking competition. Do you dare? Newcomers referred to those who were attending this year's banquet for the first time. In other words, Han Yunxi and the North and South young masters. She wanted them to have a drinking competition. What was the meaning of this? Han Yunxi frowned as she looked at Princess Changping. Changping, speak clearly. You want this Wang Fei to compete in drinking with men. What do you mean? Princess Changping pretended not to understand the meaning behind Han Yunxi's words. She earnestly replied, it means that you three newcomers will compete to determine a champion. Then you'll start defending the ring. Esteemed Wang Fei, you wouldn't be afraid, right? It's fine if you don't dare. Just admit defeat and withdraw. As soon as she finished speaking, Murong Wanru opened her mouth. Sister-in-law, everyone's in high spirits. Don't be a wet blanket. That's right, that's right. Esteemed Wang Fei, we're very optimistic about you. Esteemed Wang Fei, you have to represent us women and win against the two of them. Don't lose face. Esteemed Wang Fei, it's rare to have such good wine. Don't let it go to waste. Everyone began to persuade her. Han Yunxi knew she couldn't escape. She glanced at the North and South young masters, a complicated look flashing through her eyes. The real trouble had come. Her alcohol tolerance wasn't bad, but it wasn't good either. She had heard of the North and South young masters before. One of them was a dissolute man who immersed himself in brothels, while the other spent his days mingling with actors. Both of them spent their days drinking wine. If she didn't participate, not only would she dampen everyone's spirits, she'd also give them a hard time. But if she did participate, it would be a tough battle. Chapter 152. Newcomers' Wine Competition. Almost everyone was cheering. The North and South lords stood up one after another, eager to give it a try. Han Yunxi had just stolen the limelight. If they could win this wine competition against Han Yunxi, then even if their fame wasn't as great as Han Yunxi's, they would at least be on par with her. Wasn't the purpose of participating in the plum blossom meet to become famous? When a woman became famous, she would attract a group of admirers. For men, it was the same. Fame and fortune. When one's fame grew, there would naturally be benefits to be gained. Esteemed Wang Fei, since everyone is so enthusiastic, you shouldn't disappoint them. North Lord Zhongsun Che smiled as he walked out, fanning himself with a fan in his hand. His distinguished and elegant bearing and bewitching smile made it impossible for any of the girls to take their eyes off him. Of course, Han Yunqi wouldn't even spare him a glance after seeing a true Evildor like Jiyu Qishao. With the North Lord's appearance, the South Lord Li Muge didn't want to be outdone. He followed closely behind, walking to the center of the banquet. Opening his fan, he covered half of his face, which was even more delicate than a girl's. He pouted, "Esteemed Wang Fei, to be able to compete with you in wine is this little one's fortune. Don't disappoint this little one and hurt his heart." Han Yunqi almost vomited. The North and South Lords were simply one Evildor and one Evildor, a perfect match. "Imperial Aunt, why are you so unhappy? What's the big deal about a competition? I didn't expect you to be so afraid of losing," Princess Changping urged. She couldn't wait any longer. At this time, Han Yunqi stood up, calm and composed. "Of course we can compete. But, how will we compete? What will happen if we lose? What will happen if we win? Shouldn't we at least make it clear?" Whether it was a blessing or a disaster, she couldn't avoid it. She threw caution to the wind. Although it was more troublesome, she hadn't tried it before. She might not lose. Today, she had to do her best to convince these people and become the biggest winner of the Plum Blossom meet. She would be the only winner. Let's see who would dare to find trouble with her in the future. Seeing Han Yunqi agree, Princess Changping was overjoyed. She stood up as well. "You three newcomers will fight. The winner will be the arena master. You will guard the arena and accept challenges from others. If you lose..." Before Princess Changping could finish speaking, Han Yunqi interrupted her. "If you lose, take off your pants and run a lap around Xuanwu Street." Cough. Cough cough. Hearing these words, Princess Changping choked and coughed several times. The surrounding people were all stunned. Many of the maidens' faces flushed red. Even the males were looking at each other in dismay, unable to believe what they were hearing. Han Yunqi, oh, Han Yunqi. Last time, you made a bet with Mu Liuyu about taking off your outerwear. This time, you actually want to take off your pants. Are you still a woman? You are really ruthless. Are you that confident of winning? Unexpectedly, Han Yunqi added, "This rule isn't limited to just us three newcomers. It's the same for those who challenge the arena master. If you win, you'll be the arena master. If you lose, you'll have to take off your pants and run a lap around the arena. Since you're going to play, you might as well play big." Hearing Han Yunqi's words, the women who'd been itching to give it a try all turned ghastly pale as their hearts beat like drums of retreat. Although the outcome wasn't certain, the rules were set. Once they participated in a drinking competition, there would be risks. Who would dare to let themselves take such a risk? One had to know that Mu Liuyu had such a prominent status and was also Princess Changping's close friend. Even if someone else took her place, her reputation would still be ruined. If they were to lose, wouldn't they end up even worse off than Mu Liuyu? The crowd was silent. The North and South young masters, who were as ostentatious as flowers, were also silent, their faces filled with disbelief. Very good. Just now everyone was urging and even provoking Han Yunqi. Now, it was Han Yunqi's turn to provoke. She raised her brows and looked at the North and South young masters, smiling. "Since the two young masters are in such a good mood, why don't we play a bigger game? You wouldn't dare, right?" The North young master, Zhongsun Che, had never been able to withstand provocation. After hesitating for a moment, he couldn't help but smile from ear to ear. "How could we not dare? As long as the Wang Fei is willing, this one will definitely accompany you to the end." He thought. Han Yunqi was at most a woman. Although her background was ordinary, she was still a well-behaved girl. How many opportunities did she have to compete in drinking? How good could her alcohol tolerance be? She proposed such a frightening condition, most likely to scare everyone away. Others might fall for it, but he wouldn't fall for it. She, as a woman, could afford to play, but as a man, how could he not dare to play? What would others think if this spread out? A man versus a woman, who was afraid of who? Once the North young master agreed, the South young master, Lee Muge, couldn't refuse. Although he was extremely unwilling and didn't have the guts, the North young master had already agreed. If he backed down, wouldn't he become a laughingstock? All right, Wang Fei, this one will also accompany you to the end. Lee Muge finally said something with a bit of manliness. Han Yunxi was very satisfied and gave the two of them a thumbs up. Her actions were free and easy, full of confidence. The surrounding people were uneasy and began to speculate. Could it be that this woman's alcohol tolerance was very good? Was she hiding her strength again? After settling the North and South young masters, Han Yunxi looked at Princess Changping. Changping, who else wants to participate? Do you want to announce your name first? Princess Changping immediately looked at the crowd, but other than the men who didn't want to participate in the beginning, the rest of the women didn't raise their heads. Princess Changping immediately lost face and angrily called out, Shangguan Qing'e, you're coming? Princess, Qing'e's stomach doesn't feel well today. I don't even dare to eat too much tea and pastries. Maybe next time. Shangguan Qing'e softly refused. Su Yingxue, you're coming? Princess Changping asked again. Su Yingxue was so frightened that she quickly waved her hands. Princess, my alcohol tolerance isn't good. You know that. Princess Changping was very embarrassed. She huffed and asked a few more people, but without exception, all of them refused. The people who had been making a fuss just now all withered and hid. One had to know that they were different from the North and South young masters. The North and South young masters' alcohol tolerance was publicly acknowledged, and they had a high chance of winning against Han Yunxi. However, they were still women. If Han Yunxi became the ring master, who would dare to take the risk when they saw her so confident? Who knew how much she could drink? If either the North or South young masters became the champion, then they would lose for sure. At the very least, even if they could win, once they won and became the champion, they would have to accept other challenges. Who could guarantee that they would always win? This was a business that would definitely suffer a loss. Princess Changping was about to ask again, but Han Yunxi stopped her. Changping, you're also participating, right? Ah. When these words came out, Princess Changping immediately became nervous. She kept asking others, why didn't she think of herself? She definitely wouldn't participate. How could she take such a risk? She felt awkward and pretended to casually glance at the sky. I think I'll pass. It's getting late. Maybe by the time the three of you are done, the sky will be dark. This time, I'll let you guys fight first. Princess Changping thought that Han Yunxi was simply too arrogant. Did she think she was so great after being in the limelight just now? She actually dared to propose such a bet. The North and South young masters weren't easy to deal with. Otherwise, she wouldn't have risked being scolded by her imperial mother to invite them. It didn't matter if others didn't fight. As long as Han Yunxi fought, as long as Han Yunxi got drunk, everything would be easy to handle. As for the bet, it could only be said that Han Yunxi brought it upon herself. She was seeking death. After confirming that no one else was participating, Han Yunxi finally let out a breath of relief. She had proposed such a bold bet in order to make others cower in fear. This way, her only opponents would be the North and South young masters. If she won against these two, her troubles would be solved. For the sake of fairness, the three of them didn't use a double elimination system and didn't care who went first. Instead, all three drank at the same time. Within the set time, whoever drank the most wine would be considered the winner. The table was set and the wine was served. The drinking competition was about to begin. After confirming that they didn't need to participate, the crowd was once again in high spirits. The atmosphere was very lively as everyone cheered for the three of them. Without a doubt, it was all for the North and South young masters. Han Yunxi calmly sat down, unaffected. The three of them each had a table and a chair. The table was filled with wine jars, with quite a few piled to the side. A palace maid stood by each of them, ready to serve wine at any time. The host was, of course, Princess Changping. She meaningfully glanced at Murong Wanru, who was hidden in the crowd, then excitedly stood up and walked out. With a raise of her hands, the lively scene quieted down. In the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, whoever has the most empty jars will be the winner. Everyone present is a witness. Princess Changping loudly declared. No problem. Sure. The North and South young masters liked this kind of rule too much. In the time it takes for a stick of incense to burn, with their usual standards, as long as they put in a bit more effort, there probably wouldn't be anyone present who could beat them. They glanced at Han Yunxi with disdain, then looked at each other with narrowed eyes. They clearly knew that their true opponents were each other. Imperial Qin Aunt, let me confirm with you again. There shouldn't be any problems, right? Princess Changping specifically asked. Han Yunxi seriously looked at the North and South young masters, her gaze seeming to be scanning for something. After a pause, she said, we can begin. Okay. Princess Changping personally lit the incense on the side. Begin. With that, the three of them moved almost simultaneously. The North and South young masters picked up their wine jars and began to gulp down large mouthfuls. Han Yunxi was no exception. In a battle of quantity, there were no shortcuts. They could only drink as fast as they could. In the beginning, it was a competition of speed. Towards the end, it was a competition of alcohol tolerance. Drinking fast at the beginning meant drinking more, but towards the end, it was a test of alcohol tolerance. Drink, drink, drink. The three of them moved very quickly. Jar after jar of wine was emptied and smashed to the side. As soon as it began, the scene was very intense. No one present dared to make a sound, afraid to disturb them. Not long after, the distance between them increased. The North and South young masters had smashed almost the same number of jars, 5 each. Han Yunxi was 2 jars behind them. Although Han Yunxi had drunk 2 jars in such a short time, which was considered pretty good for a woman's alcohol tolerance, this was a competition. Everyone was concerned about winning or losing. No one would sympathize with her. Boom. The North young master smashed his 6th jar, followed by another bang. The South young master followed closely behind. Han Yunxi's 3rd jar was still in progress. Looks like Qin Wangfei won't be able to make it in time. She's already so far behind at the beginning. She'll definitely fall even further behind. Isn't that so? The real competition of alcohol tolerance is at the end. Right now, the alcohol probably hasn't kicked in yet. After a while, the alcohol will kick in and she probably won't be able to continue. Very quickly, discussions broke out everywhere. Chapter 153. In the midst of the discussion, many people were already waiting for the time to pass, wanting to see Han Yunxi lose. If she lost, she would have to fulfill the terms of the bet. Mu Liu's reputation had just gone down the drain, and now Han Yunxi, who had personally set the terms of the bet, was also going to fulfill it. This was simply the capital's biggest show of the year. Who wouldn't look forward to it? If news of this spread out, the entire imperial capital would be shaken. Of course, Princess Changping and Murong Wanru were also looking forward to it. However, compared to the bet, they were looking forward to Han Yunxi getting drunk even more. Many people left their seats and came forward, wanting to see more clearly. There were also many people sitting in groups of 3 or 5, whispering. Murong Wanru slipped to Princess Changping's side and whispered, "Princess, are you ready?" Princess Changping's gaze never left Han Yunxi. Her lips curved in a sinister smile, and she whispered, "Don't worry, watch your show and prepare well." Yes. Murong Wanru understood and quietly returned to her original position. No one noticed her movements. Everyone's attention was on the 3 tables in front of them. At this time, Han Yunxi finally smashed the 3rd jug and picked up the 4th. However, the North and South lords were already on the 7th jug. Princess Changping was delighted and kindly reported the numbers for the 3 of them. The North and South Lords drank 6 jugs each. Qin Wangfei has already drunk 3 jugs. As soon as she finished speaking, who knew that the North Lord would raise his brows and wink at Princess Changping. Of course, his hands didn't stop moving. He casually threw out the 7th jug, which crashed to the ground with a bang, leaving not a single drop of wine behind. Heavens! So fast! For a moment, the entire audience cried out in surprise. This finally affected the South Lord and Han Yunshi. The South Lord looked over and became anxious. He simply stood up, grabbed the 7th jug with both hands, and poured it in even more crazily. Drink, drink, drink. It had to be said that this kind of Li Muge was too manly. No matter how one looked at him, he didn't look like a sissy. Young Master Bei's lips curled into a disdainful sneer. He stood up as well and brought over the 8th jug of wine. Holding it with one hand, he raised his head and gulped it down. As for Han Yunshi, she was still sitting. She held her 4th jar of wine with both hands and continued drinking at the same speed as before. Victory and defeat seemed to have become even more obvious. Although there was not much difference between the North and South Lords, and the battle was very intense, everyone was more concerned about Han Yunshi. After all, she had lost, and there was more to see. Qin Wangfei, you're already 3 or 4 jars behind them. Good luck. Esteemed Princess Consort, don't lose face for us women. The difference in strength wasn't that great. Victory and defeat could very well be decided by a few mouthfuls of wine. Thus, they had to give it their all from the start. They all thought that Han Yunshi would at most drink 3 jugs. Who knew that this woman had hidden her strength so well? Moreover, she was so proficient in the art of drinking. Her method of drinking far surpassed theirs. The wine flowed endlessly into Han Yunshi's mouth. She stood there, tilting her head back to drink. Although she was a woman, she was as unrestrained as a wine immortal. She had an otherworldly temperament, causing people to stare at her in a daze. Bang! When Han Yunshi smashed the 9th jug, the North Lord, who was beginning to feel tipsy, finally regained his senses. He looked at the incense stick and saw that it was almost burnt to the end. There wasn't much time left. He touched his stomach and burped. Although the alcohol had kicked in and he was drunk, he wasn't completely unconscious. He still knew what had happened. Seeing that Han Yunshi had lifted the 10th jug, he clumsily followed suit. However, it wasn't the half-finished 9th jug, but a new one. The people beside him were about to remind him when the North Lord shouted, "Drink." He shouted, "Drink." However, both his hands were pressed against the jug and he didn't move for a long time. Seeing this, Han Yunshi heaved a huge sigh of relief. She held the 10th jug of wine in her hand and didn't drink it. Actually, even though her stomach was bloated, it wasn't much bigger than the North and South Lords. At this point, she really wanted to vomit, but she forced herself to hold it in. Moreover, the moment she stopped, the effects of the alcohol kicked in. Her head was already spinning and she could not stand properly. She clenched her teeth and tried to clear her head. Everything was normal. She pretended to be disdainful and looked at the Bei Gongzi as if she was waiting for him. Seeing this, the people around them didn't notice anything strange. However, only Han Yunshi knew how much her stomach was churning. She told herself, "Steady, steady, steady." The incense stick was reaching its end. She had half a jug more than the North Lord. Once the time was up, she would win. Suddenly, the North Lord roared and lifted the jug to drink. Han Yunshi's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to force herself to continue drinking. However, the North Lord had only taken a few mouthfuls before the entire jug was smashed to pieces. Bang! The sound reverberated throughout the entire place. He lifted his head and heaved a long sigh. Then, he lowered his head and immediately vomited. His situation was similar to the South Lord's. He couldn't stop vomiting once he started vomiting. However, his situation was slightly better than the South Lord's. The alcohol had kicked in, but he wasn't so drunk that he felt weak. The North Lord had also lost. At this moment, Han Yunshi took a step back and almost fell over. At the same time, the incense stick had reached its end. Time was up. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.